All right, cults. So I've kind of already made a video like this before, except it was an iceberg and we technically didn't cover every cult. Also, it's age restricted. In this one, we're going to talk about a little over 100 groups. So, oh man, it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun. Yeah, let's jump right into it.
Oh, how we cried when we thought how badly hurt we could have been because of our disobedience. And after that, we never went too near the fireplace again.
So if the Lord should spank you a little bit or correct you, it's for your own good. It's because he loves you and wants you to be good and obey, so he can reward you with all of his wonderful blessings. Praise the Lord.
And so that's the story of the 3 little accidents and how Jesus loved us enough to spank us.
Well, that story about the 3 little accidents is a good lesson on obedience for all of us to remember.
So first off, we're going to talk about Children of God, or the Family International. And the Family International, formerly known by names including Children of God, the Family of Love, and the Family, traces its origins back to the late 1960s as a countercultural Christian community started by David Berg, who called himself Moses David. Initially attracting young people, often hippies, through communal living and an evangelical fervor, the group soon became known for its highly unconventional beliefs and practices. Among these was the practice of flirty fishing, which was a method of evangelism that involved sexual relationships with potential converts. Basically, they were encouraging their female members to have sex with people they were trying to bring into the group. Berg used his self-styled, quote, Mo letters to communicate an apocalyptic isolationist worldview, mixing New Testament Christianity with end-time scenarios in which the, quote, system, or the outside world, would be overthrown. As membership expanded globally, the Children of God developed into a network of communal homes in various countries, subsisting largely on donations, literature distribution, and sometimes questionable fundraising tactics. And Berg himself was seen by members as a prophetic figure who claimed titles like the last end-time prophet, with many of his writings encouraging sexual liberation far beyond mainstream Christian norms. Over the decades, the group would repeatedly reinvent its name and structure in response to growing scandals and legal scrutiny over child sexual abuse and exploitation claims. Ex-members began speaking out about the severe abuse, extreme discipline, and the physical and sexual mistreatment of minors, prompting government investigations in several countries. Though the Family International has since condemned past practices and claims to enforce strict rules banning adult and child sexual contact, survivors have described enduring lifelong trauma, implicating the movement's high control environment and Berg's controversial teachings. One of the biggest examples of this was Ricky Rodriguez, who was the adopted son of the cult leader David Berg, and he would go on to commit a murder in 2005, killing one of the women in the cult who raised him, Angela Smith, and allegedly sexually abused him. And today, while the Family International's membership numbers have declined significantly, the group continues to operate as a new religious movement, retaining its core missionary ethos. Scientology, founded by L. Ron Hubbard in the early 1950s, is one of the most controversial and secretive modern religious movements, often criticized for its aggressive tactics, financial demands, and legal battles. Originally introduced as a self-help system called Dianetics, Hubbard's ideas centered around the concept that negative experiences become embedded in the subconscious mind, causing psychological distress. His initial organization, promoting Dianetics, would go bankrupt, leading him to reframe his system as a religion, rebranding it as Scientology in 1952, likely to gain a tax-exempt status. The Church of Scientology would be formally founded in 1954 and has since expanded to a transnational organization with a rigid hierarchy, secretive teachings, and a well-documented history of legal disputes. Scientology promotes the idea that humans are immortal spiritual beings, or thetans, trapped in physical bodies, and that spiritual enlightenment is achieved through, quote, auditing, which is a process in which individuals recall past traumas while hooked up to an e-meter, which is basically like a little lie detector, weird thing. And those who progress far enough on this bridge to total freedom reach the operating thetan levels, or OT levels, where they are exposed to secret teachings. And this includes, and I'm not lying here, this is what they believe in, the Xenu narrative. And this claims that 75 million years ago, an intergalactic overlord brought billions of souls to Earth and killed them with hydrogen bombs, and their spirits became trapped in humans, which haunt us today. Yeah, it's weird. And beyond its esoteric theology, they have been accused of operating as a manipulative, profit-driven organization that exploits its members. The movement has been implicated in numerous legal scandals, including Operation Snow White, which was a 1970s espionage campaign in which Scientologists infiltrated U.S. government agencies to remove negative records about the church. They've also been accused of abusive practices such as coerced abortions, forced labor within its elite C organization, and the use of harassment tactics against critics, such as its notorious fair game policy, which allegedly encourages lawsuits, surveillance, and public smears against defectors and journalists. Despite these controversies, Scientology has maintained a legal recognition as a religion in the United States, Italy, and Australia, while other countries such as France and Germany classify it as a dangerous cult. The movement aggressively courts celebrities, with figures like Tom Cruise and John Travolta serving as public faces of the organization, which helps attract new recruits. However, membership numbers have reportedly dwindled over the years, with some estimates suggesting fewer than 40,000 active Scientologists worldwide. The Unification Church, sometimes colloquially known as the, quote, Moonies, is a religious movement founded by Sun Myung Moon in South Korea in 1954. Initially called the Holy Spirit Association for the Unification of World Christianity, it later rebranded as the Family Federation for World Peace and Unification. It blends Christian ideas with Moon's own teachings as outlined in his text, The Divine Principle, and Unificationists believe Moon was tasked with completing Jesus' unfinished mission to create a sinless, ideal family that would serve as a blueprint for restoring humanity to a pure, God-centered lineage. The movement is particularly famous for its mass blessing ceremonies, sometimes incorrectly described as mass weddings, during which engaged or married couples renew vows or receive Moon's theological blessing. In practice, Moon matched thousands of couples, often across national or racial lines, urging them to form families that would transcend history. And through blessing and loyal adherence to unification teachings, members believed they could purify their bloodline and help fulfill God's plan to establish a sinless world. Over the decades, they have, of course, drawn significant controversy and been labeled a dangerous cult by critics. And it's argued that they demand an unwavering obedience and heavy financial donations, sometimes to the point of leaving its members bankrupt. And internally, the church has suffered schisms since Moon's death in 2012, most notably the emergence of breakaway factions like the Rod of Iron Ministries, which is an offshoot of the church in which they have blessing ceremonies for their weapons or guns. And yeah, it's an interesting one. The People's Temple was founded in 1955 by Jim Jones in Indianapolis, Indiana. Evolving from a small Christian congregation, Jones was influenced by a mix of Christian teachings and far-left ideals, including admiration for figures like Joseph Stalin and Vladimir Lenin. Early on, he preached racial integration and social justice, which, combined with mounting controversies in Indiana, led Jones and his followers to move to Northern California in the mid-1960s. There, People's Temple established branches in Redwood Valley, Los Angeles, and San Francisco, and by the 1970s, they had developed a broad political network, gaining support from prominent California politicians. Despite Jones's public persona as a benevolent preacher and activist, former members began to allege emotional manipulation, financial abuse, and even physical and psychological abuse within the movement, setting the stage for the group's eventual downfall. Seeking to create what he called a socialist paradise free from U.S. government interference, Jones and several hundred temple members relocated to Guyana in South America, founding a communal settlement named Jonestown in the mid-1970s. Life in Jonestown rapidly deteriorated into harsh working conditions, malnutrition, and a nearly constant atmosphere of paranoia fueled by Jones's ongoing drug use and increasingly apocalyptic sermons. Trouble would escalate after Congressman Leo Ryan visited Jonestown in November of 1978 to investigate allegations of abuse, and when he attempted to leave with defectors, temple security forces would ambush and kill him and 4 others at a nearby airstrip. Later that same day, under mounting pressure, Jim Jones would orchestrate a mass murder at Jonestown. 918 people died, most by ingesting a cyanide-laced drink, although many were injected against their will or shot by armed guards. And this grim event would instantly become one of history's most notorious cult tragedies, symbolizing the extreme danger and absolute power and unchecked groupthink, and cementing the People's Temple's legacy as a cautionary tale of how idealism could turn into a devastating cult of personality. And this whole situation is where you get the phrase, drinking the Kool-Aid. Heaven's Gate was a new religious movement founded in 1974 by Marshall Applewhite and Bonnie Nettles, referred to by their followers as Doe and T. They combined Christian Malarian ideas with New Age concepts and strong elements of UFO and extraterrestrial belief, all of which shaped the group's theology and communal practices. Early on, Applewhite and Nettles toured the United States, advertising meetings in which they claimed to be higher beings who had come to Earth to share a path towards transcendence. Their group, which they called various names over the years, would attract spiritual seekers looking for an alternative to mainstream religion. And these individuals were often intrigued by the promise of ascending to the, quote, next level, a heavenly realm above the human plane. Over time, membership solidified into a more insular community, and by the mid-1970s, a core group of a few dozen followers had embraced their lifestyle, giving up all personal possessions and sharing every resource communally. They believed that Earth was about to be recycled, and that only those following the teachings of Applewhite and Nettles would evolve beyond their human forms and avoid being left behind. Life in Heaven's Gate was marked by rigorous discipline. Members had to renounce their family ties, sexual relationships, and individual identities, even adopting similar hairstyles and clothing. And 8 of the male members, including Applewhite, voluntarily underwent castration to remain free from sexual desire. Now, after Nettles would die of cancer in 1985, Applewhite refined his teachings. Where they had originally believed they would physically be collected by spacecraft and taken to a higher dimension, they shifted towards the notion that the human body was merely a vehicle or a container, and that the soul would depart upon death and ascend into new, perfected bodies aboard a UFO. This perspective came to a disturbing climax in March of 1997 when 39 members of Heaven's Gate, including Applewhite, died by coordinated suicide in a rented mansion in California. They timed their deaths to coincide with the close approach of Comet Hale-Bopp, believing that an extraterrestrial craft hiding behind the comet would receive their liberated spirits. They all wore identical black outfits, Nike Decade sneakers, and armbands labeled Heaven's Gate Away Team, each of them carrying a small amount of money for miscellaneous fees in their journey beyond Earth. And media coverage would make this one of the most infamous examples of end times cult activity in modern American history. And the group's story continues to fascinate researchers and the public alike, highlighting how powerful beliefs in extraterrestrial salvation combined with Christian imagery and science fiction, can motivate a tight-knit community towards extreme measures in the pursuit of transcendence. The Branch Davidians trace their origins to a schism within the Davidians, which was a group founded by Victor Houtef in the 1930s after he was expelled from the Seventh-day Adventist Church for promoting what he saw as biblically mandated reforms. Upon his death in 1955, his wife Florence would take charge, but she predicted apocalyptic events that would fail to occur by 1959, shaking the community and causing her to dissolve the main Davidians. Benjamin Rodin, a one-time follower of Houtef, claimed a new divine message and organized a splinter faction called the Branch Davidians, eventually taking over the group's land near Waco, Texas, known as New Mount Carmel Center. And after Benjamin's death in 1978, his wife, Lois, inherited leadership. However, internal tensions would rise as their son, George Rodin, also vied for control of the group. Adding to the complexity, a young Vernon Howell, who would later rename himself to David Koresh, arrived in the early 1980s, attracting a following and split from Lois's group to lead his own congregation in a separate location. Following Louise's death and a power struggle that led to a violent encounter in which they got into a gunfight, and Rodin himself would later murder Wayman Del Adair with an axe, claiming that the man was sent by David Koresh to kill him. and he would be judged insane and confined to a psychiatric hospital. Thus, David would secure control over the Mount Carmel property. Under Koresh's leadership, they became internationally famous for the 1993 Waco siege, one of the deadliest clashes in modern American law enforcement history, when the U.S. Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, or ATF, attempted to execute a search warrant related to illegal firearms and child abuse accusations. A gun battle erupted, resulting in the deaths of 4 agents and 6 sect members on February 28th. A tense 51-day standoff followed, during which children were released, but Koresh and most of his adherents remained barricaded inside the compound. And the siege would end on April 19th, when the FBI, using tear gas and armored vehicles, initiated a final assault that culminated in a massive fire. 76 individuals, including Koresh and many children, would die in this fire, and while the government reports concluded that these sect members set fires themselves, surviving branch Davidians maintained that the FBI's actions were primarily responsible. And in the aftermath, the branch Davidians would splinter, with some loyalists still holding Koresh as a prophetic figure, and other factions rejecting his legitimacy and maintaining their own interpretations of biblical prophecy. Aum Shinrikyo was founded in 1987 by Shoko Asahara as a hybrid religious movement that blended elements from Buddhism, particularly Tibetan schools and esoteric practices, and Hindu notions of deities such as Shiva, as well as Christian apocalyptic ideas. Early on, Aum Shinrikyo presented itself as a yoga and meditation group with a strong spiritual message, which attracted a surprising number of highly educated and elite university graduates in Japan. They even had a little cool anime recruitment videos. Interesting. They would soon earn legal recognition in 1989, but grew increasingly controversial due to allegations that members were being subjected to extreme routines and often coerced into donating money and remaining in the organization against their will. Under Asahara's leadership, Aum Shinrikyo began to adopt end-time prophecies, including apocalyptic warnings of an impending nuclear conflict that would devastate humanity, leaving Aum Shinrikyo's adherents as a sort of a chosen elite to inherit a purified future. As time went on, the group's teachings became a disturbing mixture of conspiracies, sometimes blaming Jewish financiers, Freemasons, and Western nations for orchestrating world crises, and using these conspiracies as a justification for violence. The depths of Aum Shinrikyo's ambitions and danger were only fully revealed after its members orchestrated the deadly Tokyo subway sarin attack on March 20th, 1995. This act, carried out by cult operatives on 5 different train lines, released lethal nerve gas in crowded subway cars, killing 13 people and injuring thousands more. Post-attack investigations would uncover massive stockpiles of chemical and biological agents in Aum Shinrikyo facilities, as well as a Russian military helicopter and plans to produce assault rifles. These revelations highlighted the sect's militaristic escalation, which Asahara allegedly conceived as a form of salvation by hastening the global apocalypse he had persistently prophesied. In the legal aftermath, senior leadership, including Asahara himself, faced trials leading to multiple convictions and ultimately the hanging of 13 members found responsible for the attacks, including Asahara himself. And despite the 1995 crackdown, the group never fully disbanded, as it rebranded as Aleph in 2000, officially distancing itself from Asahara's violent doctrines, but continuing to recruit people. The Manson Family was a notorious commune and cult led by Charles Manson that was formed in the late 1960s in California amid the countercultural tide of hippie culture, free love, and LSD experimentation. At its height, the group had around over 100 members, primarily young women from conventional, often middle-class backgrounds who fell under Manson's charismatic spell. He positioned himself as a guru figure, blending apocalyptic visions, scripture misappropriations, and music-fueled philosophies into a bizarre, manipulative worldview that encouraged radical rejection of societal norms. The group's shift from spiritual communal livings to acts of shocking violence was triggered by Manson's belief in Helter Skelter, a prophecy he said was encoded in the Beatles' music, predicting a race war in America that he had intended to spark. Under Manson's direction, many members found themselves perpetrating petty crimes, drug trafficking, and assaults, culminating in a series of brutal murders in August of 1969. On the first night Cult members Susan Atkins, Charles Tex Watson, and Patricia Krenwinkel drove to the home of actress Sharon Tate, where they murdered her while she was pregnant and 4 other people in the residence. The following evening, Manson directed another group of family members to a different address where Lino and Rosemary LaBianca were stabbed to death. And in the aftermath, authorities came to realize that the Manson family likely committed additional murders, including that of Gary Hinman and Donald Shea. Eventually, Manson and several family members were arrested, tried, and convicted. And although their death sentences were commuted when California briefly abolished the death penalty, most remain in prison to this day, and Charles Manson would die behind bars in 2017. And the Manson family story is probably one of the most popular, enduring as a stark example of how a nihilistic, charismatic figure can galvanize impressionable individuals to commit shocking acts of violence under the guise of counterculture ideals. Order of the Solar Temple was a secretive, neo-Templar and esoteric movement founded in 1984 by 2 men, Joseph de Mombro and Luc Jouret, who had both broken off from a related organization called the Renewed Order of the Temple. Rooted in an eclectic blend of Rosicrucianism, Theosophy, and New Age doctrines, and the mythic legacy of the medieval Knights Templar, they taught that members were reincarnated Templars chosen to guide humanity into a cosmic era. Ascended masters, or higher spiritual beings, resided on the star Sirius, and that they needed to prepare for an imminent apocalypse that would involve the destruction of Earth. Underlying these dramatic visions were elaborate esoteric rituals and strict degrees of membership in which the upper ranks were privy to increasingly secret teachings, complex Masonic-like rites, and magical ceremonies held in secret underground chapels. They would end up facing mounting pressure from legal and media scrutiny in the early 1990s, especially after an arms trafficking scandal involving silencers would accelerate internal tensions. And de Mombro, who claimed to be a reincarnated Egyptian pharaoh and one of Jesus' disciples, orchestrated what he called a transit from Earth to Sirius, triggered by convictions that the outside world was corrupt and that their members of the cult were being persecuted. In October of 1994, more than 50 members of the order would be found dead across Switzerland and Canada in what was framed as either a mass suicide or a murder ritual. 2 subsequent collective deaths in France and Canada over the next few years would bring the total death toll to 74, leaving behind a tangle of unanswered questions, and these tragedies would spark a rash of anti-cult fervor across Europe, leading to official inquiries and heightened scrutiny of new religious movements. And because all these senior leaders had died, the only individual brought to trial was Swiss composer Michel Tabachnik, who served as a high-level associate of de Mombro, and he would be acquitted in 2 separate trials, leaving many of the order's controversies shrouded in secrecy and fueling conspiracy theories surrounding the group's finances and motives. NXIVM was founded in 1998 by Keith Rainier, who was an individual who touted himself as an innovative teacher in the realm of personal development and leadership coaching, but was ultimately exposed as a manipulative con man and sex offender. His organization initially drew people with a promise of executive success programs, which claimed to help participants reach their highest potential through a system called rational inquiry. Newcomers would pay thousands of dollars for intensive courses that merged multi-level marketing structure with a self-help ethos, encouraging them to recruit family and friends into the program. NXIVM's corporate veneer and high-minded language about ethics, empowerment, and personal growth masked its cult-like hierarchical system, and any deviance from strict organizational discipline triggered harsh sanctions and exile. Over the years, various public figures and offspring of wealthy and powerful attended NXIVM events, and some joined its inner circle believing that it discovered a rare path to enlightenment. Yet as the group expanded, a chorus of critics emerged, describing its methods as hypnotic manipulation, psychological torment, and exploitation of the vulnerable. Their downfall would escalate when defectors revealed to the New York Times and other publications that an all-female secret group called DOS existed at the organization's core. As a women's empowerment circle, DOS in reality was a master/slave ring where female members were coerced into sexual servitude, branded with Rainier's initials, and subjected to humiliating readiness drills demanding instantaneous compliance. Rainier groomed these women, threatening them with leaked collateral if they rebelled, and required them to follow Rainier's rules regarding diet, sleep, and sexual availability. This would lead to him and other leaders' arrests, with co-defendants such as TV actress Allison Mack, who was in Wilfred. I don't know if anyone's ever seen that show. It was really good. It's really weird seeing her character in that show because her character is batshit insane, and maybe there's some parallels there. I don't know. Rainier would be convicted in 2019 of racketeering and related offenses, cementing NXIVM's reputation as a manipulative sex cult, and he would receive a 120-year prison sentence, and key associates also faced prison time or felony convictions. The Movement for the Restoration of the Ten Commandments of God, or MRTC, was founded in 1989 by excommunicated Catholic priest Joseph Kibotire and ex-prostitute turned visionary Colonia Dignidad, and was one of the deadliest new religious movements in modern history. The group took shape in southwestern Uganda during a period of social turmoil marked by the aftermath of Idi Amin's brutal dictatorship, a devastating AIDS epidemic, and lingering trauma from the Ugandan Bush War. Dignidad and Kibotire claimed to have seen visions of the Virgin Mary, and their aim was to prepare followers for the imminent apocalypse by strictly obeying the Ten Commandments, an obsession so strong that members rarely spoke in order to avoid the possibility of lying or gossiping. The group subsisted into secluded communes, teaching that the world would end in the year 2000. As the year 2000 approached, tension and apocalyptic fervor soared. The leaders had declared that the world would be annihilated on January 1st of that year, but when nothing happened, disillusionment would spread among the members. Pressured by their followers, Dignidad and Kibotire announced a second, more specific date, March 17th, 2000, saying this time the end would be final and certain. On that day, hundreds of members gathered in a makeshift church in Kanangu, where doors and windows had been boarded up from the outside. And a few minutes into the ceremony, an explosion would rock the compound and fierce fire would break out, killing many in its wake. Initial news reports labeled that the incident was a mass suicide, but police began to discover other bodies in mass graves around other compounds, and they reclassified the event as a coordinated mass murder. Ultimately, over 700 people died, making it one of the world's most lethal cult tragedies. And although police issued international warrants for Dignidad and Kibotire, none of them were apprehended, and their whereabouts remain unknown to this day. The Rajneesh Movement began in the late 1960s around the teachings of charismatic Indian guru Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, later known as Osho. Rajneesh had worked as a philosophy professor and spiritual lecturer throughout India before attracting a following of intellectuals, seekers, and those disillusioned by mainstream religion. By 1974, his early devotees purchased property in Pune, India, establishing an ashram that quickly became a magnet for Western visitors drawn by Rajneesh's provocative discourses on sexuality, psychology, and meditation. The ashram offered a broad array of innovative encounter groups, therapy sessions, and spiritually oriented self-improvement courses, and Rajneesh actively integrated modern psychotherapeutic methods into his approach, labeling them as meditations and recruiting a growing community of orange-robed followers called neo-sannyasins. And throughout the 1970s, the ashram's reputation spread, and by the late 1970s and early 1980s, thousands of devotees from Europe, the Americas, and Asia were visiting or living in Pune, propelling Rajneesh to significant global fame. However, financial difficulties and external pressures in India prompted a dramatic shift in 1981 as Rajneesh and his inner circle, led by spokesperson Ma Anand Sheela, moved to a massive ranch in Oregon called Rajneeshpuram. Over the next few years, they would develop a city-like commune, complete with its own infrastructure, farmland, and international airport. This abrupt expansion and attempts to gain political influence in the nearby town of Antelope triggered fierce local opposition, culminating in a series of sensational and illegal acts. Commune leaders, particularly Sheela, engaged in wiretapping, mass voter manipulation, and most notably, a bioterror attack in 1984 in which salmonella bacteria was spread in local salad bars to suppress voter turnout, which was the first large-scale bioterror event on U.S. soil. When law enforcement discovered these crimes, numerous commune officials were arrested, with Sheela herself pleading guilty to attempted murder and assault, and Rajneesh would accept an Alford plea to immigration fraud charges and was deported from the United States in 1985, after which many of his followers left and Rajneeshpuram would collapse. Falun Gong, also known as Falun Dafa, emerged in China in the early 1990s under Li Hongzhi, who was revered by his followers as a deity-like figure. The movement combined the slow-motion Qigong exercises and meditation with Li's moral philosophy, emphasizing truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance while also promoting a broader cosmology that challenges mainstream science. Falun Gong teaches that practitioners can cleanse karma, gain supernatural abilities, and achieve a divine state by strictly following Li's instructions, which include opposition to homosexuality, rejection of feminism, and skepticism towards medicine, believing that virtue is the key to healing. While members publicly highlight its health benefits, they often downplay Li's more controversial beliefs, such as his views on evolution and extraterrestrials, and the practice revolves around 5 daily exercises, including 4 standing movements and 1 seated meditation, which are considered essential for spiritual transformation. Though it has strong religious elements, they avoid identifying as a religion, particularly in China, where religious movements face strict government scrutiny, and by the late 1990s, tensions with the Chinese Communist Party would lead to a nationwide ban in 1999. The government branded Falun Gong as anti-communist, heretical movement, and following the crackdown, the movement would expand internationally, establishing public practice sites and media ventures, which became known for its far-right stance, conspiracy theories, and strong support for Donald Trump, and despite its ongoing controversy, persists as a global new religious movement whose adherents see themselves as moral pioneers on a path to spiritual salvation. The Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or FLDS, emerged from Mormon fundamentalism after the Latter-day Saints Church renounced polygamy in 1890. Rooted in Short Creek, which is now Colorado City and Hilldale, the FLDS traces its spiritual lineage to leaders like Lawrence C. Woolley and John Y. Barlow, who upheld polygamy as essential to their faith. The group adopted increasingly rigid patriarchal doctrines, particularly the one-man rule, which grants absolute authority to a single leader. Under Rulon Jeffs and later his son, Warren Jeffs, the FLDS institutionalized polygamy, enforcing arranged marriages, often involving underage girls, and strict communal discipline, leading to legal scrutiny for, of course, child sexual abuse, human trafficking, and fraud. The sect would maintain control through rigid dress codes, reassignment of wives and children at the prophet's command, and suppression of individual rights in favor of divine authority. High-profile cases, including the mass removal of children from their compounds and Warren Jeffs' conviction, where recordings of, quote, heavenly sessions were used as evidence, and I'm gonna play a little bit for you. It's super fucking weird.
Hello, ladies. I trust you're all being Zion increasingly. Are there 12 of you gathered? Okay. The Lord showed me He's very pleased with this group of 12 ladies, willing to do whatever you're called on to do.
These were basically sex tapes. And despite internal power struggles, splinter factions, and legal pressures, FLDS remains defiant. And the group is one of many polygamous religious communities that uphold centralized leadership, rigid gender roles, and plural marriage as divine law, often clashing with mainstream legal and human rights standards. Shincheonji Church of Jesus, often called Shincheonji, is a controversial new religious movement founded in South Korea by Lee Man-hee in 1984, claiming a unique interpretation of biblical prophecy that positions Lee as a, quote, promised pastor, who alone can decipher the hidden metaphors in the book of Revelation. Followers believe that only Shincheonji members will attain salvation at the last judgment, while others face damnation, and this, combined with the group's secretive nature and apocalyptic teachings, has led mainstream Christian denominations to denounce it as heretical and cult-like. Structured under Lee's centralized authority, the church is divided into 12 tribes, each overseeing different regions, which in turn reinforces its hierarchical structure. And their aggressive evangelism methods, often involving infiltration of other churches and deceptive recruitment practices, have sparked public backlash, particularly after a major COVID-19 outbreak in South Korea, which was traced to a Shincheonji member known as Patient 31. This led to legal battles, government scrutiny, and accusations of obstructing public health measures. And the movement's influence extends beyond religious teachings, utilizing a sophisticated media network, volunteer organizations, and even digital campaigns to spread its message. Its doctrine, which emphasizes an imminent apocalypse where a select 144th will be saved in this fuels its urgency in recruiting new members, but many former adherents have accused the group of manipulation, coercive control, and isolating members from family to strengthen loyalty. Synanon, founded in 1958 in Santa Monica, California by Charles E. Dederich Sr., began as a drug rehabilitation program called Tender Loving Care before rapidly evolving into a radical communal organization blending therapy, self-help, and authoritarian control. Central to Synanon's methodology was the, quote, Synanon game, which was an intense form of attack therapy where members were subjected to relentless psychological confrontation under the guise of promoting honesty and personal growth, but which soon became a mechanism for control and manipulation. As Synanon expanded, its practices grew increasingly extreme as women were forced to shave their heads as a symbol of transformation, and marriages were forcibly dissolved and reassigned to sever personal attachments, and men would undergo forced vasectomies while pregnant women were coerced into abortions, all in the name of communal purity. The organization's financial success, fueled by internal business ventures, had the group generating millions annually. And over time, Synanon shifted from its therapeutic origins into an increasingly oppressive and violent entity, notorious for its coercive tactics and willingness to use physical force to maintain control. As the Synanon game became a tool for social domination, dissenters would face brutal retaliation, and those who attempted to leave were subjected to intimidation, public shaming, and even violence. The group's descent into criminality became evident in high-profile incidents such as the placement of a rattlesnake in an attorney's mailbox, which was a blatant act of intimidation that exposed Synanon's use of violence against critics. And as legal scrutiny intensified, allegations of financial fraud, evidence tampering, child abuse, and attempted murder would further tarnish its reputation, culminating in multiple lawsuits and criminal investigations. The compounded legal pressures, internal strife, and growing public awareness of its abuses would lead to Synanon's formal dissolution in 1991, though its legacy actually persists in influencing various tough love and confrontational therapy programs. The Anthill Kids was a notorious doomsday cult founded in 1977 by Canadian cult leader Rock Thoreau, who styled himself as the prophet Moisey, and exerted absolute control over his followers through a twisted fusion of religious fanaticism, apocalyptic prophecy, and extreme physical and psychological abuse. Born in 1947 in Quebec, Thoreau was recognized for his intelligence but dropped out of school in 7th grade, immersing himself in biblical studies, particularly the Old Testament, which later became the ideological foundation of his movement. Initially affiliated with the Seventh-day Adventist Church, he was expelled in 1978, prompting him to establish his own commune, where he convinced vulnerable individuals to abandon their former lives and submit to his rule. Naming his group the Anthill Kids, likening his followers to worker ants laboring under his command, he implemented a brutal hierarchy in which all female members were forced into sexual servitude as his wives or concubines bared him 26 children in an effort to propagate his so-called divine lineage. He enforced an atmosphere of abject terror, subjecting his followers to grotesque punishments for perceived disobedience, including beatings with hammers and belts, and forced them into breaking their own limbs, including nail removal and even more nightmarish acts such as suspending members from hooks or forcing them to sit on burning stoves. Children were not spared from his reign of horror, as they suffered sexual abuse and other cruel degradations that left them permanently scarred. So scarred, in fact, that one of these social workers, Georgia Brown, who saved all the children in the Anthill Kids cult, would later take her own life, largely due to the horrors of the case. His rule began to unravel when he was arrested for assault in 1989, triggering the investigation that exposed the series of gruesome crimes, including the murder of one of his followers, Solange Boillard, and the death of an infant, Samuel Giguere, and other unexplained fatalities linked to his pseudoscientific healing practices. Convicted of second-degree murder and multiple counts of assault, he would be sentenced to life in prison. Yet even behind bars, his legacy of violence and manipulation continued to haunt the public consciousness. And in a final act of poetic justice, he would meet a violent end in 2011 when he was murdered by his own cellmate, closing the chapter on one of Canada's most horrific cult leaders. The Lord's Resistance Army, or LRA, emerged in 1987 amid Uganda's post-independence turmoil, a period that was marked by ethnic divisions, economic disparities, and political instability. With its roots in the broader insurgency against President Yoweri Museveni's regime, Led by Joseph Kony, a self-proclaimed prophet who fused traditional African spiritualism, prophetic Christianity, and occult mysticism, the LRA would initially frame itself as a divine liberation movement, promising to restore justice through a theocratic order based on the Ten Commandments. Kony's charismatic and enigmatic persona, coupled with his claims of supernatural powers, would help him galvanize a loyal following, exploiting the historical grievances of the Akoli people who had long faced political and economic marginalization. The LRA's campaign quickly devolved into a reign of terror that extended beyond Uganda into South Sudan, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and Central African Republic, leaving a devastating humanitarian crisis in its wake. The group would become infamous for its brutal tactics, including widespread abductions, particularly of children who were forced into combat, sexual slavery, and forced labor, while civilians faced mutilation, rape, and massacres designed to instill fear and dismantle social structures. As reports of these atrocities mounted, the LRA would face growing international condemnation, with governments and human rights organizations calling for its dismantling. And despite military offensives by Ugandan and regional forces, along with designation as a terrorist organization by the United States, the LRA would prove remarkably resilient, retreating into remote border regions where it continued its sporadic attacks. And efforts by the ICC to bring Kony and his top commanders to justice for crimes against humanity have yet to fully succeed, as Joseph Kony's whereabouts remain unknown to this day. Vissarionism is a religious movement centered around Sergei Anatolyevich Torop, known to his followers as Vissarion, who claims to be the reincarnation of Jesus Christ in the New Age and the living Word of God. Born in 1961 in Russia, he experienced a dramatic, quote, spiritual awakening in 1990, after which he began preaching a message of ethical transformation, reincarnation, and apocalyptic renewal. His teachings emphasized veganism, communal self-governance, and the pursuit of spiritual liberation through disciplined lifestyles in harmony with nature. And he would found the Church of the Last Testament, a loosely structured new religious movement with thousands of followers worldwide, many of whom would reside in isolated Siberian settlements. However, unlike traditional religious institutions, they maintain a decentralized structure, focusing on a direct personal connection to Vissarion's revelations rather than a hierarchical organization. Vissarion cultivated a distinct spiritual doctrine that merges Christian symbolism with Eastern mysticism and apocalyptic prophecy, and his movement would face scrutiny from Russian authorities, and in September of 2020, he and close aides were arrested on charges of running an illegal religious organization and causing harm to citizens. And yeah, that would pretty much be the end of that. Him and two other people are still in prison, and their trial has yet to be scheduled. Ooh, yeah. Make America Great Again. MAGA. First of all, I want to state that this is not about conservatives, Republicans, or even people who voted for Trump or Trump supporters. This is about the cult of personality that surrounds Donald Trump. And if you know what I'm talking about, well, you know. MAGA is more than a political slogan. It serves as a foundation of this cult of personality that elevates Donald Trump to a near mythic status or idol amongst his most ardent supporters, transforming political allegiance into a form of quasi-religious devotion. As we've seen, Trump's rallies, marked by impassioned cheers, chants, and a sea of red MAGA hats, create an atmosphere where his every word is treated as a divine authority. This loyalty culminated in the events of January 6th, where thousands of his followers, convinced that Trump was the last bulwark against a corrupt establishment, stormed the U.S. Capitol in what became an expression of their unwavering belief in him. The insurrection itself served as a defining moment in which the line between political activism and blind adoration would blur, as Trump's words were taken as a direct call to arms by supporters who saw themselves as warriors in a righteous battle to save the nation. Now, this cult of personality has been carefully cultivated over the years through Trump's charismatic leadership, his emotionally charged rhetoric, and a narrative of perpetual victimhood against a supposed entrenched elite, even though never mind. With these supporters internalizing a worldview in which he alone possesses the vision and strength to restore the nation, making America great again. Yeah, I mean, and if you know who I'm talking about, you know this is not about people who voted for Trump. This is about those people, the people who make their entire lives and personalities revolve around this man. If you wear a MAGA hat more than 4 days in a week, I have news for you, buddy. And there are many cults of personality that are neither unique to Trump nor American politics, as history has demonstrated this with figures like North Korea's Kim Jong-un, Russia's Vladimir Putin, and even Adolf Hitler, who still has people. Oh, man. And this phenomenon itself is just a reflection of how charismatic leadership and relentless messaging can generate an almost unbreakable allegiance, highlighting the ways in which political loyalty, personal identity, and ideological commitment could lead to these followers making their whole life surround someone who doesn't even know they exist. The Church of Satan, founded in 1966 by Anton LaVey in San Francisco, emerged during a period of growing public fascination with the occult, witchcraft, and alternative spiritualities, positioning itself as a radical rejection of traditional religious morality in favor of individualism, self-determination, and carnal existence. LaVey, styling himself as the high priest, frames Satan not as a literal entity, but as a potent symbol of personal empowerment and a rebellion against societal norms. Codifying this philosophy in the Satanic Bible, the Church of Satan embraced theatrical, ritual, and provocative symbolism, not only to shock mainstream sensibilities, but also reinforce its core principles of personal sovereignty and rejection of self-sacrificing religious ethics. And the church would gain widespread attention, influencing modern Satanism today and sparking debates on religious freedom and nonconformity. Following LaVey's death in 1997, the Church of Satan has continued under the leadership of High Priest Peter H. Gilmore, maintaining a strict adherence to its atheistic, individualistic philosophy while eschewing supernatural beliefs, emphasizing personal achievement and promoting skeptical inquiry. And despite often being labeled as a cult, the Church of Satan prides itself on its radical individualism, denying any enforced conformity among its members, though this paradox has not shielded it from internal disputes and schisms. The process of the Final Judgment, founded in 1966 in London by Mary Ann MacLean and Robert de Grimston after their expulsion from Scientology, emerged as a unique fusion of Christianity, Gnosticism, and occult symbolism, proposing an intricate theology centered on the interplay of four archetypal divinities: Jehovah, Lucifer, Satan, and Christ, each representing different aspects of human existence. Rather than worshiping these figures as literal gods, the church framed them as psychological and spiritual forces whose reconciliation would mark the next stage of human evolution, a concept that set it apart from both mainstream religions and contemporary occult movements. The group's practices were steeped in theatricality and ritual, including Sabbath assemblies, baptisms, marriages, and intense processing sessions designed to purge negative emotions and facilitate spiritual transformation through attack therapy, as we talked about with Synanon. They cultivated an elite nomadic existence, moving from London's upscale Mayfair district to secluded communes in the Bahamas and the Yucatan Peninsula, reinforcing its esoteric and apocalyptic worldview. However, despite its intellectual and countercultural appeal, they became mired in controversy due to its unsubstantiated claims of connections with Charles Manson and his followers, leading to public distrust and a decline in influence. By 1974, internal fractures led to the separation of its founders, with MacLean taking control over most of the remaining followers and rebranding the organization as the Foundation of the Church of the Millennium. And as the group migrated to the United States, it gradually abandoned its radical theological elements, ultimately evolving into a philanthropic organization centered on animal rescue in Utah. The Church of the SubGenius is a satirical, countercultural religious organization that emerged in the late 1970s as a deliberate parody of mainstream belief systems, blending absurdist humor, science fiction, and conspiracy theories into a unique mythology. Founded by Ivan Stang and Philo Drummond, the church revolves around the enigmatic figure of J.R. Bob Dobbs, a fictional 1950s salesman turned prophet. And Dobbs is portrayed as the earthly embodiment of slack, an ineffable quality that grants its devotees liberation from societal constraints. The Church of the SubGenius weaves together UFO lore, occult rituals, and parodies of religious dogma to mock the self-seriousness of organized religion and the commodification of spirituality, while advocating for an ethos that celebrates irony, absurdity, and personal freedom. And this approach has particularly resonated with artists, college students, and disaffected individuals drawn into its subversive humor and critique of consumer culture, finding its philosophy a playful yet sharp rejection of dogmatic rigidity. And through its mix of comedy, surrealism, and social commentary, the Church of the SubGenius continues to challenge mainstream perceptions of spirituality, making it one of the most enduring and thought-provoking countercultural movements in modern religious history. The 12 Tribes is a religious movement that emerged from the Jesus movement of the early 1970s in Chattanooga, Tennessee, under the leadership of Gene Spriggs, who sought to recreate what he viewed as the pristine communal church of the first century, as described in the book of Acts. Originating as the Light Brigade, a small ministry centered around a coffee shop called the Lighthouse, the movement quickly evolved from a loosely structured gathering of young converts into a highly organized insular community that underwent several name changes, such as the Vine Christian Community Church and Northeast Kingdom Community Church, before settling on the 12 Tribes. Over the years, the movement expanded across the United States and internationally, establishing rural communal settlements, businesses, and schools while enforcing strict social structures based on biblical literalism. The group practiced communal ownership of property, rigid courtship and marriage rules, homeschooling, and tightly controlled labor systems, which have drawn significant controversy, particularly regarding allegations of child labor, custodial interference, and authoritarian leadership. Former members have actually accused the 12 Tribes of fostering an environment of excessive corporal punishment, racial supremacist rhetoric, and isolation from the outside world, with some alleging that only its adherents are considered capable of salvation, while mainstream Christian denominations are dismissed as corrupt and spiritually fallen. The group has been subject to governmental investigations and anti-cult scrutiny, leading to high-profile incidents such as the 1984 Island Pond raid in Vermont and ongoing legal battles over accusations of child abuse. And despite all this, they continue to maintain their vision, positioning themselves as a countercultural alternative to mainstream Christianity and believing that they are living in preparation for an impending biblical foretold transformation of the world. The Way International is a non-denominational Christian ministry that emerged in the mid-20th century America under the leadership of Victor Paul Wierwille. Wierwille, who held advanced theological degrees from institutions such as Princeton and the University of Chicago, claimed to have rediscovered the original apostolic understanding of Christianity, asserting that biblical scriptures were divinely inspired and perfectly preserved in their original form. This conviction led to the development of a structured curriculum of Bible study classes, most notably the Power for Abundant Living Today series, which he expanded on his earlier teachings and became a cornerstone of the ministry's outreach. The Way International emphasized fostering grassroots ministry that prioritized Bible study and community engagement over traditional denominational structures, and in addition to its educational courses, they produced publications such as the Way magazine and advocated for strict biblical literalism and a return to first-century Christian principles. They reject the Trinity in favor of the belief that Jesus is the literal Son of God, separate from God the Father, and they have drawn scrutiny for fostering an insular community that discourages independent theological interpretation, all of which has been marked by internal disputes over doctrinal authority and organizational direction, leading to schisms and ongoing controversies. And additionally, accusations regarding financial practices and reports of authoritarian leadership have fueled accusations that the Way International operates with a cult-like intensity. However, despite these controversies, they maintain a strong presence through its emphasis on biblical research, charismatic leadership, and persistent outreach via social media and educational programs. Unarius Academy of Science, founded in 1954 in Los Angeles by Ernest and Ruth Norman, is an ambitious fusion of New Age spirituality, interdimensional metaphysics, and futuristic science that posits a fourth-dimensional science of life based on harmonic frequencies, reincarnation, and channeling. Central to their teachings is the belief that the cosmos consists of layered vibrational planes rather than mere physical space, with human beings evolving towards higher states of consciousness over successive lifetimes. Their teachings outline a cosmology in which higher spiritual worlds such as Venus, which they claim serves as a healing center, interact with human existence through psychic transmissions and extraterrestrial guidance. Ernest Norman, regarded as a prophetic channel for cosmic intelligences, actually wrote foundational texts that helped shape this doctrine, while Ruth expanded on the movement's influence through media outreach and radio and public access television. Despite their long-standing prediction of a grand extraterrestrial landing, an event that has, of course, repeatedly failed to materialize, its teaching continues to attract a devoted international following, with centers in Canada, New Zealand, Nigeria, and the United Kingdom. And adherents maintain that enlightened extraterrestrial civilizations, referred to as Space Brothers, have shaped human history and will one day return to usher in a new era of cosmic enlightenment. One day. One day. The Fellowship of Friends, founded in 1970 by Robert Earl Burton, is a non-denominational spiritual movement rooted in esoteric fourth way teachings, emphasizing self-awareness, artistic refinement, and an awakening from a state of, quote, waking sleep. Burton himself claims to receive guidance from 44 angelic beings, including historical figures like Abraham Lincoln and Bach, and teaches that his followers must prepare for an impending global catastrophe by cultivating higher consciousness. Headquartered at a 1,200-acre compound called Apollo in California, they promote communal living, financial tithing, of course, gotta have that money from your followers, and immersive engagement with fine arts as a means of spiritual transformation, attracting a dedicated global following. However, the movement has faced ongoing controversy, with critics labeling it as a cult due to its authoritarian hierarchy, strict financial demands, and repeated false prophecies, such as Burton's failed prediction of a 2006 nuclear apocalypse. Legal disputes have further tarnished its reputation, including lawsuits alleging Burton's sexual exploitation of young male followers and allegations of financial opulence and exploitative labor practices and psychological manipulation, which have all fueled skepticism about the group's true intentions. The Divine Light Mission was founded in 1960 in northern India by Hans G. Maharaj as a means to consolidate and spread his spiritual teachings, rooted in the Sant Mat tradition and inspired by sacred texts like the Bhagavad Gita during a time of significant social and cultural transformation. His vision of direct, experimental spirituality and inner illumination quickly attracted millions of followers, establishing the Divine Light Mission as a major spiritual movement in India. And upon his death in 1966, his 8-year-old son, Prem Mawat, was declared the, quote, perfect master, a symbolic move that left actual organizational control in the hands of his family and a child, but set the stage for profound changes in the movement's trajectory. As Rawat grew older, he asserted his independence and took the Divine Light Mission back to its Indian roots, traveling to the West in the early 1970s and transforming it into a global phenomenon, and establishing ashrams and spiritual centers in the United States, the United Kingdom, and other countries, drawing tens of thousands of young Western seekers through public appearances and grand festivals. While their message of inner transformation through meditation and direct experience of knowledge resonated with the countercultural movements of the 1970s, its rapid expansion also invited intense scrutiny, leading to accusations of mind control, financial exploitation, and cult-like practices. Additionally, Rawat's efforts to de-emphasize the Indian aspects of the mission, and by the early 1980s, facing declining influence and growing public skepticism, Rawat initiated a major restructuring, dismantling the Western ashrams and rebranding his movement as the Elan Vital movement in an attempt to present a more universal and secularized form of his teachings, and they remain active, or slightly active, to this day. QAnon is a far-right conspiracy theory movement that has increasingly exhibited cult-like characteristics, constructing an intricate narrative of hidden enemies, secret knowledge, and an impending apocalyptic reckoning known as the Storm. Emerging in 2017 on anonymous image boards like 4chan and later 8chan, QAnon has centered around cryptic drops from an unidentified figure or collective claiming insider access to top government intelligence. These messages, saturated with coded language and reoccurring slogans like "Where we go one, we go all," and "Trust the plan," have transformed the ideological backbone of the movement, drawing in a wide-ranging audience disenchanted with mainstream politics and seeking a higher sense of purpose. QAnon has evolved into a digital cult by offering adherents a quasi-religious experience in which they believe they are chosen to uncover and dismantle a supposed satanic cabal of global elites involved in child trafficking and other nefarious crimes, drawing from and amplifying older conspiracy theories such as Pizzagate. And yeah, its followers see themselves as digital warriors, collecting and decoding clues that confirm an imminent battle between good and evil, and they maintain survival through less regulated platforms like Parler, Gab, and Telegram, ensuring the movement's ongoing existence despite repeated failed predictions. Yeah. The Oneida Community, founded in 1848 by John Humphrey Noyes near Oneida, New York, was a radical religious commune built on the belief that humanity could achieve earthly perfection, rooted in the idea that Jesus had already returned in 70 AD and that the millennial kingdom could be actively realized. Seeking to eliminate sin and create a harmonious society, members practice communalism, pooling resources, labor, and property into a highly structured collective governed by strict and social moral codes. Among its most controversial practices was complex marriage, a system in which all members were considered married to one another, permitting sexual relations among consenting adults while discouraging exclusive pair bonds. Reproduction was further regulated through a form of eugenics in which certain members were selectively paired to produce morally and spiritually superior offspring. And although the communal model allowed members to achieve economic self-sufficiency, external legal challenges, shifting social norms, and growing internal dissent gradually eroded the movement's stability, culminating in its eventual dissolution in 1881. Eckankar, founded in 1965 by Paul Twitchell, is a new religious movement centered on the belief that the soul is inherently divine and can achieve spiritual liberation through direct, personal experience of the divine presence. Its teachings emphasize soul travel, which is a meditative practice where adherents claim to separate their consciousness from the physical body to explore higher realms of awareness. Twitchell framed Eckankar as a universal path to self-realization, and the movement grew internationally, with followers in over 120 countries and core teachings translated into more than 25 languages, while maintaining its non-profit religious status in the United States. Despite its global reach, Eckankar has faced criticism, with detractors labeling it as a cult due to its leadership structure, reliance on pseudo-spiritual techniques, and claims that its practices can create an insular and highly divine community. Nevertheless, they continue to attract seekers, drawn to its promise of inner transformation and a direct divine experience. The Church of Bible Understanding, originally known as the Forever Family, was founded in 1971 by Stuart Trail in Allentown, Pennsylvania, and grew into a religious organization that blended evangelical Christianity with strict economic and social controls. Trail, claiming to possess the only true understanding of God's Word, encouraged members to sever ties with their families and live communally under his leadership, reinforcing isolation and deepening loyalty within the group. At its peak, the church had around 10,000 members and 110 communal living arrangements, primarily centered in New York, with a lifestyle characterized by rigid economic structures that funneled members' wages into the church's hands, contributing to Trail's personal wealth. The group established business ventures, including carpet cleaning enterprise and a used van business, but its most successful endeavor was Old Good Things, a retail chain that specialized in architectural salvage that generated nearly $6 million annually. Beyond its economic reach, the Church of Bible Understanding would face severe scrutiny for its humanitarian efforts, particularly its management of orphanages in Haiti. While claiming to spend around $3 million annually on charitable efforts, reports revealed that these orphanages had overcrowded and terribly unsanitary conditions, raising concerns about the true allocations of these funds. And the issues came to a tragic climax in February of 2020, when a fire at one of its orphanages killed 15 children, exposing the group's failure to meet basic safety and welfare standards. And even after Trail's death in 2018, the church's legacy remains controversial, serving as a case study in how religious movements can intertwine spiritual authority with economic control. Eastern Lightning, officially known as the Church of Almighty God, is a highly controversial and secretive new religious movement founded in China in 1991, claiming that Jesus Christ has returned in the form of a Chinese woman. The group teaches that human history is divided into divine ages, culminating in the imminent age of kingdom, where true believers will be liberated from sin and suffering. And originally emerging in a small underground house church network, the movement gained momentum under leadership of Zhao Weishan, a former physics teacher, transforming the sect into a rapidly growing organization. They were later designated as a cult by Chinese authorities, resulting in frequent crackdowns, mass arrests, and reports of torture among its followers. And despite portraying itself as a persecuted faith, they have been reportedly linked to violent incidents such as the 1998 Nanyang attacks, the 2002 mass kidnappings of rival Christian leaders, and the infamous 2014 murder of Wu Shuoyan in a McDonald's restaurant where members brutally killed a woman who refused to join them. The House of Yahweh is a highly controversial religious group based in Eula, Texas, founded by Yisrael Hawkins, formerly known as Buffalo Bill Hawkins, and has been widely described as a cult by former members and critics. Claiming to be the one true faith instituted by Yahweh, the group emphasizes the use of sacred names, referring to God as Yahweh and Jesus as Yahshua, while strictly adhering to the 613 laws of the Torah. Its members observe the seventh-day Sabbath, biblical feasts like Passover and Feast of Tabernacles, and reject Christian holidays such as Christmas and Easter. They also enforce kosher dietary laws, encouraging followers to wear garments reminiscent of traditional Jewish attire, and Hawkins positioned himself as a divine member and one of the prophesized two witnesses of the end of times, and authored numerous books, including The Mark of the Beast and The Two Witnesses, which serve as the foundation of the group's apocalyptic teachings. The House of Yahweh operates under a highly centralized and authoritarian structure, with Hawkins maintaining near total control over the finances, doctrine, and communal life, often leading to isolation from outsiders. And over the years, the group has faced controversy, facing allegations of financial exploitation, child labor, and sexual abuse. And one of the most damning cases involved an elder, Jedediah Hawkins, who was convicted in 2007 of aggravated sexual assault of his 14-year-old stepdaughter, receiving a 30-year prison sentence. However, the group continues to operate, maintaining its claim of exclusive divine truth and positioning itself as a key player in the fulfillment of biblical end-time events. Love Has Won, also known as the Galactic Federation of Light and Joy Reigns, was a fringe New Age religious movement led by Amy Carlson, who styled herself as Mother God and claimed to be a 19 billion-year-old divine being, reincarnated as figures such as Jesus, Cleopatra, and Marilyn Monroe. Emerging in the early 2000s from internet-based spiritual forums, the movement combined extraterrestrial spirituality, conspiracy theories, and apocalyptic prophecy into an eclectic and ever-evolving belief system. Central to its doctrine was the promise that Carlson would lead followers into a mystical fifth dimension, freeing them from a corrupt, low-vibration society controlled by an alleged global cabal. The group pushed controversial narratives that denied historical events, such as the Holocaust, and framed people like Donald Trump as part of Carlson's divine lineage, and they would operate through daily live streams and the sale of expensive New Age products that reportedly removed negative energy, all while maintaining communal living arrangements that former members described as abusive, financially exploitative, and marked by severe sleep deprivation. Despite its grand spiritual claims, the movement's core membership never exceeded 20 full-time adherents and was characterized by frequent relocation, shifting from Colorado to Hawaii. And over time, the group's practices became increasingly extreme, with Carlson's deteriorating health and erratic behavior exacerbated by alcohol abuse and malnutrition. And in 2021, Love Is One would come to a grim end when Carlson's mummified corpse was discovered in a makeshift shrine wrapped in Christmas lights and covered in glitter, signaling the complete unraveling of the movement and the insanity of her followers. The Church of Euthanasia, or COE, was founded in 1992 in Boston, Massachusetts by Chris Korda and Robert Kimberg, or Pastor Kim. Was a radical and highly provocative organization that combined antinatalism with performance art, anarchic activism, and shock tactics to promote voluntary human population reduction. It was rooted in the belief that overpopulation is the primary cause of environmental destruction, and their central commandment was, "Thou shalt not procreate." This was infamously described as the world's only anti-human religion, encapsulated in its blunt slogan, "Save the planet, kill yourself." And yet, they really just operated with shock tactics, and over the years, they would face, of course, repeated backlash, including legal threats after a 2003 case was linked to its website, and its activities would eventually dwindle after 2015, leaving behind an archive of radical manifestos and media artifacts, serving as a lasting testament to one of the most controversial and ethically challenging movements. Mithraism was a secretive mystery religion that flourished in the Roman Empire from roughly the 1st to 4th century CE, centered on the god Mithras, whose origins trace back to ancient Iranian worship of Mithra. The cult distinguished itself with its elaborate system of initiation grades through which its adherents progressed in spiritual understanding and communal commitment, as its worshippers would gather in underground temples. Mithraism supposedly offered its followers a path to personal salvation and cosmic harmony, emphasizing the transformative power of ritual reenactment through communal feasts, secret oaths, and ritual meals. And despite the absence of complete doctrinal texts due to its secretive nature and its age, this was very old. Extensive archaeological evidence, including inscriptions, altars, and reliefs, have provided modern scholars with substantial insights into the mystery structure and close association with the martial and communal life of its predominantly male adherents, many of whom were actually soldiers. The cult of Isis in the Greco-Roman world was centered on the Egyptian goddess Isis, whose enigmatic mysteries blended ancient Egyptian ritual with Hellenistic practices to form a secretive initiation rite that promised rebirth in a blessed afterlife. Initiates underwent elaborate purification rituals, often involving fasting, ceremonial bathing, and the consumption of a sacred drink to prepare for a symbolic death and subsequent rebirth. And the cult's practices, which alluded to Egyptian funerary beliefs and the promise of immortality, resonated deeply in a world where the mysteries of life and death were both feared and revered. As this one was another very old one, where we're in the old section. The cult of Cybele, often known as Magna Mater in Roman context, emerged from ancient Anatolian traditions with roots as early as the 8th century BC, where she was revered as a potent mother goddess, closely linked to the natural world. In Rome, her cult underwent significant transformation during crises like the Second Punic War, and the Roman Senate would embrace her worship, weaving her into narratives of Trojan ancestry to reinforce the legitimacy of the ruling class. And the cult of Cybele would play a crucial role in shaping the religious and cultural fabric of the Greco-Roman world by continuously adapting ancient traditions to meet the evolving spiritual and political needs. The Eleusinian Mysteries were among one of the most renowned and secret religious cults of ancient Greece, centered on the worship of Demeter and Persephone at Eleusis, and was rooted in a Bronze Age agrarian cult. And over centuries, these rites would evolve into a complex system of initiation that promised profound spiritual insight in the hope of immortality through symbolic death and rebirth. At the heart of the cult was the myth of Persephone's abduction by Hades, which was reenacted through rigorous purification rituals, fasting, and ceremonial bathing, and the consumption of kekion, a ritual drink whose mysterious ingredients, possibly including ergo or psychoactive mushrooms and opium, would induce visionary trance-like states. And the group wielded a profound influence on society, inspiring art, literature, and later spiritual movements. And although it was eventually suppressed by the rise of Christianity, the Eleusinian Mysteries continued to captivate modern imaginations as a potent symbol of secret knowledge. Orphism was an influential mystical tradition in ancient Greece that centered on secret beliefs and initiation rites, allegedly handed down by the legendary poet Orpheus. At its core was the myth of Dionysus, whose violent death at the hand of the Titans and miraculous resurrection revealed that humanity possesses a dual nature, a mortal, material body inherited from the Titans, and a divine spark or soul derived from Dionysus. This duality was seen as punishment for the contamination of the divine, and culminated in the spiritual purification and rebirth through mysterious rites known as telete, which promise liberation from the endless cycle of reincarnation. The secrecy of these rites was enforced by a strict oath and also contributed in the cult's aura of mystery and exclusivity, ensuring that only the most dedicated initiates could hope to attain knowledge. And over time, Orphism would profoundly influence the religious and philosophical landscape of Greece and beyond, intertwining with mystical traditions such as Pythagoreanism and even impacting early Christian thought. Cult of Dionysus was a dynamic, subversive religious movement in ancient Greece that centered on the god Dionysus and was steeped in symbolism as its adherents celebrated the god through rituals involving the image of the bull, serpent, and exotic felines such as tigers and leopards, and used wine not only as a sacrament but as a medium through which divine inspiration and liberation could be achieved. Sol Invictus, also known as the Unconquered Sun, emerged as a central cult in the late Roman Empire around 274 AD, which was transformed into a state-sponsored religion that symbolized divine invincibility and cosmic order. Emperor Aurelian would revive this practice, and his reforms not only restructured the priesthood, integrating it into elite senatorial class, but also institutionalized the celebration of the sun's birth on December 25th, a festival that would later influence the Christian celebration of Christmas. Bet you didn't know that. Yeah. The cult of Baal, originating in ancient Near East, was the worship of Baal as a powerful force controlling the natural phenomena such as rain, thunder, and agricultural fertility. In the mythic narratives recorded in texts like the Baal cycle, Baal is depicted as a heroic figure who battles chaos to ensure the fertility of the land. The cult would spread among the Canaanites and Phoenicians. Its worship evolved to include diverse local manifestations. However, in later practices, prophetic figures would denounce Baal worship, and later, as Christianity and Islam emerged, the name Baal took on further pejorative connotations with figures like Beelzebub in Christian demonology, symbolizing demonic power, thus underscoring its enduring and contentious legacy of the cult of Baal in shaping ancient religious thought. The cult of Astarte, the Hellenized form of the Near Eastern goddess, emerged in Bronze Age traditions and was especially prominent among the Canaanites and Phoenicians. And worshipped as a goddess of war, sexuality, and royal power, she was depicted with lions, doves, and chariots. And her cult was deeply intertwined with the political and economic life of Phoenician city-states like Sidon and Tyre, spreading across the Mediterranean through trade and influencing Greco-Roman deities such as Aphrodite and Venus. And rituals associated with Astarte included sacred prostitution and martial rites, reinforcing her complex role as both a fertility and warrior goddess. The cult of Osiris was central to Egyptian religion, embodying themes of death, resurrection, and eternal life through the myth of Osiris, a god linked to fertility, agriculture, and the afterlife. His story, being murdered and dismembered by his jealous brother Set, then resurrected by his wife Isis, symbolized the cyclical regeneration of life, much like the annual flooding of the Nile, and this myth formed the basis of elaborate funeral rituals and mystery rites, reinforcing the belief that both pharaohs and devotees could achieve eternal life. The cult of Ra was a cornerstone of ancient Egyptian religion, venerating Ra as the supreme sun god and creator who governed life, death, and rebirth. Worship centered on his daily journey across the sky, symbolizing the sun's renewal and its battle against chaos in the underworld. This cult, which peaked during the Old Kingdom, became deeply tied to state ideology, with pharaohs claiming divine descent from Ra and commissioning monumental temples and obelisks in his honor. The cult of Anubis was also central to ancient Egyptian funeral practices, with Anubis revered as the divine embalmer and guardian of the dead. Depicted as a jackal-headed figure, he oversaw the mummification and the weighing of the heart, determining a soul's worthiness for the afterlife. His cult, which dates back to Egypt's early dynastic period, remained influential into the Greco-Roman world, where he merged with Hermes and Hermanubis, symbolizing his enduring role as a guide of souls and a protector of divine order. All right, now back to the cool shit. Sorry, I fucking love ancient mythology, but I hate the fact that, obviously there's no footage or anything. It also draws to the mystery of it all. We're constantly seeking answers. I have no idea what I'm talking about. Let's just move on to the next one. The Nuwaubian Nation, founded by Dwight York, also known as Malachi Z. York, is an American new religious movement that emerged from a fusion of Black nationalism, esoteric spirituality, and conspiracy theories. Initially rooted in Black Muslim teachings during the late 1960s, York's doctrine underwent multiple transformations, incorporating influences from ancient Egyptian mythology, Native American traditions, ufology, and pseudoscientific narratives about the Anunnaki and the planet Nibiru. Over the decades, the movement evolved through various identities, before settling as the United Nuwaubian Nation of Moors, relocating from New York to a rural compound in Georgia known as Tama-Re. And the group promoted a belief system that framed Black people as descendants of ancient extraterrestrial beings, rewriting history with mystical and revisionist narratives. York's prolific writings and charismatic leadership attracted a following, promising enlightenment through secret knowledge encoded in esoteric symbols and teachings. However, the movement became widely discredited following York's 2002 arrest and subsequent conviction on charges including child molestation, racketeering, and financial fraud, leading to a 135-year prison sentence. And this legal downfall severely fractured the group, causing many members to abandon it, and the Tama-Re compound was demolished. The Lev Family, also known as the Church of Jesus Christ at Armageddon, was founded in 1968 by Paul Erdman, who later renamed himself Love Israel. Originally based in Seattle, Queens, and Hill, the group expanded from a small household into a vast network of communal homes and businesses, advocating for a doctrine centered on eternal life, universal oneness, and rejection of conventional societal norms. Their distinctive lifestyle included eschewing birthdays, clocks, mirrors, and even driver's license while adhering to a predominantly vegetarian diet sustained through gardening. The group's affirmations, such as Love Israel or Love Israel, you get it, guys? Love Israel. In Love Israel, positioned himself as the sole husband in a system of group marriage, maintaining a strict hierarchy where women were expected to perform domestic duties, like serving men first at meals and bowing upon entering rooms occupied by men, and remaining silent unless spoken to. However, by 1984, internal power struggles and financial mismanagement would fracture the community, reducing its numbers from several hundred to a few dozen, leading to the loss of key properties and forcing the group to consolidate on a 300-acre compound in Arlington, Washington. There, they attempted to sustain their communal lifestyle, but financial difficulties led to bankruptcy in 2004, forcing the sale of their last communal land. The Brotherhood of Eternal Love emerged from the vibrant counterculture of 1960s California, evolving from a commune into a group that became widely known as the Hippie Mafia. Originally founded by John Griggs, the group shifted its focus from communal living to the mass production and distribution of psychedelic drugs, particularly LSD, which they branded as Orange Sunshine. Their mission was ambitious, as it was to spark a psychedelic revolution that would transform society by expanding consciousness and challenging conventional norms. The Brotherhood hoped to produce LSD in such huge quantities that would become virtually free, and by the late 1960s, they were not only manufacturing LSD, but also importing hashish. They even collaborated with radical left-wing groups like the Weather Underground, notably assisting in Timothy Leary's escape from prison. And despite their early successes and their influential role they played in the psychedelic movement, their operations eventually caught the attention of law enforcement, and a major drug raid on August 5th, 1972 led to the arrest of dozens of members across California, Oregon, and Hawaii, marking the beginning of the end for the organization. The Order of the Nine Angles is a secretive extremist organization rooted in satanic left-hand path, which emerged in the United Kingdom during the 1960s and rose to public attention in the 1980s. The group is notorious for its blending of neo-Nazi ideology, occult traditions, and radical Satanism, and it advocates for a path of self-overcoming through extreme transgression of social norms. Operating without centralized hierarchy, they function as a network of autonomous cells, referred to as nexions, whose members share and propagate its core teachings via extensive body of esoteric literature. And their ideological framework is elaborated in its core system known as the Sevenfold Way, which outlines a rigorous initiatory process designed to transform practitioners through physical, psychological, and magical trials. And despite its relatively small base of committed associates, estimated to number in the low thousands, their radical doctrines have been linked to various acts of terrorism, sexual violence, and hate crimes, and continue to generate controversy to this day. The Church of the Firstborn, often associated with the LeBaron family, originated from a fundamentalist Mormon polygamous community established in Chihuahua, Mexico by Alma Dayer LeBaron Sr. in the early 20th century. The most influential faction, the Church of the Firstborn, of the fullness of times, was formally organized in 1955 by Alma's sons, Joel R. Wesley and Florin, who claimed a direct priesthood lineage from Joseph Smith. Centered in Colonia LeBaron within Galena Municipality, the movement's early years were marked by theological disputes and leadership struggles, particularly between Joel and his brother Ervil LeBaron. By 1962, Ervil had risen to the position of presiding patriarch and second in command, but by 1967, he claimed that he, not Joel, was the rightful leader, and this power struggle escalated into violent schisms when Ervil founded the Church of the Lamb of God in 1972, asserting that he was the prophesied one mighty and strong. His teachings encouraged the use of blood atonement against perceived traitors and opponents, culminating in the August 20th, 1972 assassination of Joel LeBaron, orchestrated by Ervil's followers. And this marked the beginning of a series of murders attributed to Ervil's sect, which extended beyond the LeBaron family to other Mormon fundamentalist groups. And leadership succession within the Church of the Firstborn remained contentious after Joel's murder, with Verlin LeBaron assuming control until his death in 1981 in a car accident. And following this, rival factions would emerge, each interpreting the group's doctrine differently, while some members formed loosely organized communities with no formal leadership. Beyond its internal conflicts, the LeBaron community has been drawn into violent confrontations with drug cartels and territorial disputes in northern Mexico. In 2009, the group gained national attention when 17-year-old Eric LeBaron was kidnapped and held for ransom, but the community refused to pay and advocated publicly against such extortion. Eric was released unharmed, but just months later, his brother Benjamin and another community leader Louise Stubbs were kidnapped and brutally murdered. The region's escalating violence came to a horrifying climax in November 4th, 2019, when 3 women and 6 children, all descendants of LeBaron family members, were ambushed, shot, and burned alive while traveling to a wedding in what authorities speculated was a mistaken attack by warring drug cartels. The massacre would draw international condemnation. Despite international factionalism, legal troubles, and persistent cartel threats and violence, the enclave remains an influential and controversial presence in northern Mexico. Creativity, or the Church of the Creator, originally founded in 1973 by Ben Klassen, is an explicitly racist, white supremacist, new religious movement that promotes white separatism and a naturalistic, racialistic worldview. The movement's core texts outline a doctrine that elevates the white race as nature's finest creation, asserting that white identity is not merely cultural, but a sacred genetic inheritance. Over time, following Klassen's in 1993 and the subsequent legal troubles and the arrests of his successor, Matthew F. Hale, the original organization splintered into competing factions, notably the Creativity Alliance and the Creativity Movement. Despite these divisions, the movement has maintained a global presence, with adherents in the United States, Australia, Europe, and beyond, all united by their commitment to racial separatism and the propagation of a racial holy war against perceived threats to white dominance. Raelism, founded in 1974 by Claude Vorlin, who took the name Rael, is a UFO religion that teaches humanity was created by an advanced extraterrestrial species called the Elohim, who humans have historically mistaken for gods. According to Raelian doctrine, the Elohim used their advanced technology to engineer human life, sending prophets such as Jesus, Buddha, and Muhammad to guide civilization, and rejecting supernatural beliefs in favor of materialistic and a scientific worldview. They believe that everything in existence operates under natural laws and emphasize scientific inquiry as a path to enlightenment. It teaches that humanity is in an age of apocalypse, threatened by self-inflicted dangers like nuclear war, and that the Elohim will return to establish a utopian world government, but only if humanity builds an embassy for them on neutral ground. From its origins as a fringe UFO movement, Raelism has expanded into a global network with tens of thousands of adherents. And the movement's radical emphasis on sexual liberation, non-traditional gender roles, and rejection of conventional moral norms has drawn both devoted followers and strong criticism, with some dismissing its claims as hoaxes and others studying its blend of science fiction, esotericism, and futurism as an expression of late 20th century cultural shifts. Transcendental Meditation is a silent mantra-based meditation technique developed by Maharishi Mahesh Yogi in the mid-1950s in India. It was initially rooted in traditional Vedic practices and later popularized during the 60s and 70s, especially after its adoption by high-profile celebrities such as the Beatles and the Beach Boys. And the technique involves sitting comfortably with closed eyes and silently repeating a specific mantra for around 15 to 20 minutes twice a day, which is said to promote deep relaxation, stress relief, and enhance self-awareness. Its appeal lies in the promise of personal transformation with improved mental and physical health, along with claims of a broader social impact, such as reducing societal stress. And despite its popularity and widespread adoption, it has also attracted criticism and controversy, with some detractors labeling it as cult-like due to its highly organized structure and proprietary training. And people argue that its use of celebrity endorsements, insular organizational practices, bear similarities to those of a cult, even though the practice itself is non-religious and accessible to all individuals of diverse faith backgrounds. The Temple of Set is an occult initiatory order founded in 1975 by Michael Aquino following his departure from Anton LaVey's Church of Satan, which he criticized for being too materialistic and commercial. Claiming to have direct revelation during a ritual, Aquino asserted that Satan's true identity was Set, the ancient Egyptian deity of chaos and strength, leading him to establish Setianism as a religious philosophy centered on self-deification, personal transformation, and mastery of magical forces. The temple operates through a structured system of 6 initiatory degrees, with members progressing based on mastery of ritual and personal development, and governed by a high priest or priestess and a council of 9. The organization functions through autonomous cells known as pylons, which facilitate local initiatory work and esoteric study. Although the Temple of Set has remained relatively small with an estimated 200 to 500 members, it is considered one of the most intellectually rigorous and secretive groups within the broader satanic and occult scene, dedicated dedicated to exploring esoteric knowledge and human potential. And Aquino himself was a highly controversial figure, not only for his religious beliefs, but his extensive military and intelligence background. As a graduate from the University of California, Santa Barbara, with a PhD in political science, he served as a psychological warfare specialist in the Vietnam War and later held various positions within the U.S. Army, NATO, and the Defense Intelligence Agency, gaining access to classified materials. His involvement with intelligence operations, alleged connections to European far-right extremists, and supposed rituals at historically significant Nazi sites have fueled speculation about the intersection between occultism and military strategy. And despite his retirement from active duty in 1994 and his subsequent work in finance, his legacy within both the occult world and conspiracy theory circles remains deeply controversial. The I Am activity is a neo-theosophical new religious movement founded in the early 1930s in Chicago by Guy Ballard and his wife Edna Ballard. Rooted in the esoteric traditions of theosophy and New Thought, the movement rapidly attracted a vast following by claiming access to divine wisdom. According to Ballard's accounts, while hiking on Mount Shasta, he encountered a mysterious figure known as Saint Germain, who initiated him into the sacred teachings, setting the foundation for what became known as the I Am activity. The movement taught that every human being contains a spark of the divine or the I Am presence, and that through specific decrees, affirmations, and meditative practices, you could awaken this inner light and progress towards self-deification and spiritual immortality. At its peak in the 1930s, they had up to 1 million followers. However, following the death of Guy Ballard in 1939, the I Am activity experienced several schisms as factions emerged, each adding their own interpretations and modifications to the original teachings. And today, the legacy of I Am activity is carried on by organizations like the Saint Germain Foundation, and a network of local groups operating under names such as the I Am Sanctuary and I Am Temple. The Aetherius Society is a UFO-based new religious movement founded in the mid-1950s by George King in the United Kingdom. According to King's claims, he began receiving telepathic communications from extraterrestrial intelligence that he called cosmic masters, that being spiritual beings from other planets, including figures like Buddha, Jesus, and Lao Tzu, who are said to have visited Earth throughout history and were aliens. Drawing on elements of Eastern spirituality and modern UFO lore, the Society envisions that these cosmic masters are guiding humanity towards a new age of enlightenment and peace. And its teachings emphasize that by cooperating with these higher beings, humans can harness spiritual energy to resolve earthly problems and prevent global crises. Over the decades, they developed a structured organization with congregations, public rituals, and initiatives like Operation Prayer Power that claim to channel cosmic energies, though its overall membership remains relatively small and geographically scattered, with concentrations in the UK, Southern California, and New Zealand. Ramtha's School of Enlightenment is a new age spiritual movement founded in 1988 by J.Z. Knight on an 80-acre compound near Yelm, Washington. Knight claims to channel, quote, Ramtha, the Enlightened One, a 35,000-year-old spiritual being whose teachings form the core of the school's curriculum. The organization presents itself as an academy for the self-development where students learn through intensive channeling sessions, meditation, energy work, and various physical and mental exercises. And these sessions are designed to help practitioners access higher states of consciousness as they unlock latent psychic abilities, promising that with sufficient practice, individuals can transform their realities and even attain ascension. Although Knight and her followers insist that this organization is not a religion or a cult, the school's highly centralized leadership, authoritarian structure, and secretive, immersive nature of its retreats have led people to classify it as cult-like, with former members and outside observers alleging the use of mind control and coercive practices in order to maintain loyalty. However, despite these criticisms, they continue to maintain a dedicated following, promoting the idea that personal transformation and spiritual enlightenment can be achieved by directly accessing transcendent energies through the channeling of Ramtha. Soka Gakkai International is a global Nichiren Buddhist organization that emerged and gained international momentum under the leadership of Daisaku Ikeda since its formal establishment in 1975. With its headquarters in Tokyo and a network of independent national organizations, they claim millions of practitioners worldwide, and they emphasize the practical application of Buddhist teachings, particularly those found in the Lotus Sutra, to promote individual empowerment, social harmony, and world peace. The organization actively engages in cultural, educational, and humanitarian initiatives, collaborating with international bodies such as the United Nations Economic and Social Council to address issues like nuclear disarmament and sustainable development. At the heart of SGI's appeal is its commitment to personal transformation and community building, which is reflected in its dynamic program of peace and cultural activities. And national organizations operate autonomously, adapting the movement's core Buddhist principles to local context through community centers, educational programs, and cultural events such as music festivals. And this emphasis on practical spirituality and active social engagement continues to attract diverse membership, making SGI one of the most prominent and widely recognized modern Buddhist organizations in the world. Not really a cult, but it's on the fringe of like mainstream religion and cult, if you know what I mean. The Nation of Yahweh, a Black Hebrew Israelite movement founded in 1979 in Miami by Hulan Mitchell Jr., who renamed himself Yahweh ben Yahweh, asserts that African Americans are the true descendants of the ancient Israelites and promotes a unique, racially charged interpretation of biblical history. Positioned as a messianic figure, Yahweh ben Yahweh wielded charismatic authority over his followers, leading the movement with strict discipline and fostering a doctrine centered on Black empowerment, self-sufficiency, and reclaiming a lost divine heritage. At its peak, the group amassed significant wealth and influence, operating a multi-million-dollar enterprise with followers across 1,300 U.S. cities and several countries. However, they have long been criticized for its Black supremacist rhetoric, for portraying white people as adversaries with wicked powers. The group's notoriety escalated when Yahweh ben Yahweh and several followers were implicated in a series of violent crimes, including over a dozen murders. Former NFL player and devotee Robert Rozier actually admitted to carrying out 7 of these killings and testified against Yahweh ben Yahweh, leading to the leader's conviction under the RICO Act in 1990, and he would serve 11 years of an 18-year sentence for conspiracy to commit murder and was released on parole in 2001, eventually passing away in 2007. The Thule Society was a secretive occult and nationalist group founded in post-World War I Munich under the original name Studiengruppe für Germanisches. I don't know. Sorry. In English, it was the Study Group for Germanic Antiquity, and they later adopted the evocative moniker Thule from ancient Greek legends about distant, mysterious northern land. The society combined esoteric occultism with Volkish nationalism, promoting ideas about the divine origins and racial purity of the Aryan people. In 1917, people who wanted to join this order had to sign a special blood declaration of faith concerning their lineage, swearing that to the best of their knowledge and belief that no Jewish or colored blood flows in their veins. Its members embraced a mythic vision of an ancient superior civilization supposedly rooted in the lost lands of Ultima Thule. And though its direct membership was relatively small, around 1,500 followers, they became a magnet for radical intellectuals and nationalists, attracting figures who later played influential roles in the early Nazi movement. The Nation of Islam is a religious and socio-political movement founded in the 1930s by Wallace Fard Muhammad and later led by Elijah Muhammad, blending elements of Islam with Black nationalist ideology. Emphasizing that African Americans are the original people of the world, they promote self-sufficiency, economic independence, and cultural revival in response to systemic racial oppression. These teachings, which diverge significantly from mainstream Sunni Islam, include the deification of its founders and a cosmology that portrays whites as a created race engineered by the scientist Yaqub, and that they're inherently violent and oppressive. While supporters view this group as a force for Black empowerment and community upliftment, it's argued that its racial doctrines, hierarchical leadership, and esoteric beliefs resemble those of a cult. One of its most prominent figures, Malcolm X, became a fiery spokesperson for the movement in the 1950s and early 1960s, advocating for Black autonomy and separation from white-dominated society. However, disillusionment with Elijah Muhammad's leadership, particularly his moral inconsistencies and extramarital affairs, would lead to his dramatic break from the Nation of Islam in 1964, as he embraced Sunni Islam, forming the Organization of Afro-American Unity to promote global human rights and racial integration. And this put him at odds with the Nation of Islam, and his eventual assassination on February 21st, 1965 at the hands of 3 men were widely believed to be affiliated with the Nation of Islam. And while it remains an influential movement, its controversial doctrines, ranging from its separatist rhetoric to its views on race and religious exclusivity, continue to provoke scrutiny and debate. The United Nation of Islam is a controversial offshoot of the Nation of Islam that we just talked about that emerged in 1978 under the leadership of Royal Jenkins, who famously styled himself as Royal or Allah in person. That's him saying that. That's not me. This group built its identity around the radical reinterpretation of the traditional Nation of Islam doctrines, and Jenkins claimed to have divine experiences, including time spent on a spaceship with angels, which he used to assert his status as the supreme being tasked with perfecting the world. He elevated his own role by insisting that black men were the original true men and gods, and propagated the idea that white people were the result of a deliberate, inferior creation process attributed to the scientist named Yakub, and they would develop a robust economic and operational structure in Kansas City, Kansas, where they established a network of businesses, including restaurants, gas stations, and construction companies. However, people would accuse the group of exploiting its members by denying them access to independent education and proper health care, while keeping them dependent on the organization for even the most basic needs. Numerous allegations would emerge over the years, including claims of forced labor, financial exploitation, and severe restrictions on personal freedoms. And former members, including some of Jenkins' own family, have come forward with testimonies detailing a coercive environment where dissent was punished and loyalty to Jenkins was enforced at all costs. The Moorish Science Temple of America was founded in 1913 by Noble Drew Ali and was a fusion of Islamic, esoteric, and nationalist philosophies aimed at empowering African Americans amid the racial and social struggles of the early 20th century. Drew Ali asserted that African Americans were descended of ancient Moabites, rebranding them as Moorish people and encouraging them to adopt Moorish surnames and carry nationality cards as symbols of their reclaimed heritage. His teachings emphasized spiritual and cultural upliftment as a means of combating systemic oppression and instilling racial pride. However, internal disputes and factionalism would culminate in the murder of Cloud Green Bay, a business manager who had attempted to seize control of the Chicago Temple in March of 1929. And Drew Ali would eventually be arrested in connection with this crime, and he would be released without indictment, only to mysteriously die a few months later at the age of 43, with the official death being listed as tuberculosis. And many of his followers suspect that he was either beaten by police or poisoned by rivals, and his death would trigger a bitter struggle over leadership, leading to violent schisms and a lasting fragmentation of the movement. Snake-handling churches are a rare and controversial religious phenomenon that is often associated with isolated Pentecostal or holiness communities in the Appalachian region of the United States. These congregations base their practices on a literal interpretation of biblical practices, which promise that true believers will be unharmed by venomous creatures and even deadly poison if they have the Holy Spirit within them. Worship services typically involve the handling of venomous rattlesnakes, cottonmouths, or copperheads, and may even also include the consumption of poison, and believers assert that if they are bitten, it is a sign of insufficient faith, while surviving a bite is viewed as divine vindication of their spiritual power. This practice has, of course, come with significant legal, social, and physical risks that have drawn widespread media attention and controversy, as state laws in many Appalachian regions restrict or prohibit the handling of venomous snakes during religious services, because there have been documented incidents of hundreds of snake bite fatalities. And moreover, people argue that the practice is not only a dangerous display of faith, but a symbol of the isolation and extremism that can develop within closed religious communities. The Source family was a 1970s American communal movement founded by Father Yod, or James Edward Baker, that combines elements of New Age spirituality, communal living, and organic health principles. Father Yod established the group after leaving Yogi Bhajan's teachings, developing his own philosophy influenced by Western mystery traditions and alternative health practices. The family operated out of a large Hollywood Hills mansion in Los Feliz, Los Angeles, and supported themselves with a series of successful health food restaurants. the flagship being the Source restaurant on the Sunset Strip. The movement's practices extended well beyond shared meals and alternative diets as they embraced a unique blend of mysticism and practical communal living, and they maintained a disciplined daily routine. And its members practice meditation, communal decision-making, and creative expression through music and art. Father Yod's reputation for having multiple wives and forming an unconventional family structure, the group presented itself as a loving and supportive spiritual community. And their legacy endures through various published histories and recordings that documented their distinctive lifestyle. However, Father Yod's untimely death in a hang gliding accident in 1975 would mark the end of an era for their community. Yet the Source family still remains a notable example of a cult-like movement that blended radical spirituality with alternative lifestyle practices. Lev Tahor is a controversial Jewish sect founded in 1988 by Shlomo Hellbrands, which claims to adhere to a strict fundamentalist interpretation of Jewish law. The group insists that its way of life is rooted in purity and absolute devotion, enforcing rigorous practices that include lengthy, highly vocalized prayer sessions and mandatory dress code for its female members, as girls and women are required to wear full body coverings from a very young age. Over the years, they would be forced to relocate multiple times across different countries, including Israel, the United States, Canada, and Guatemala, and several European nations, as authorities in various regions would scrutinize their practices and raise concerns about their methods of child rearing and overall community management. Former members, child welfare agencies, and human rights organizations would accuse the group of engaging in systematic child abuse, forced marriages of teenagers to older men, and other forms of exploitation under the guise of religious discipline. And these allegations led to multiple legal interventions and arrests, with court orders mandating the removal of children from the community and high-profile raids conducted in attempts to curb their activities. And even in December of 2024, Guatemalan authorities conducted a raid on one of their facilities, removing 160 minors after claims of child abuse and trafficking. On July 7th, 2017, Shlomo Hellbrands would supposedly drown while performing a ritual immersion in a river in Mexico, and insiders believe that he committed suicide as evidence of his abuse became more evident and were close to being published. Educo is a controversial organization founded by Irish entrepreneur Tony Quinn, often described as a cult-like group focused on self-improvement and mind training through high-priced seminars. At its core, Educo promotes a system dubbed unconscious attention, which claims to reprogram the human mind by replacing negative thought patterns with powerful, life-enhancing mental programs. And participants in these seminars are encouraged to adopt Quinn's metaphor of the mind as a computer that can be reprogrammed. Oh shit. Yeah, to achieve extraordinary personal and financial success. In addition to these mind training seminars, their operations have extended into various ventures, including fitness centers and energy companies, where Quinn has linked his mind technology to significant financial gains and business success. The organization has been criticized for its high-pressure sales tactics, where recruits are encouraged to borrow money or take on significant debt to attend these courses, and testimonies from former members detail cult-like environment marked by intense group conformity, public shaming of ex-followers, and an overarching cult of personality centered on Quinn. The Elam Boarding School was a notorious therapeutic boarding school and behavior modification program located in Poland, Maine, that operated from 1970 until 2011. Originally founded by Joseph Ricci along psychiatrist Gerald Davidson, the school was a part of what later became known as troubled teen industry, and Elam promoted a controversial abusive form of therapy based on the, quote, therapeutic community model, where public humiliation and physical punishment were seen as essential tools for correcting behavior. Former students recounted experiences of degrading tasks, such as prolonged sessions of cleaning urinals with a toothbrush, as well as instances of severe physical and psychological abuse. The school's methods, which included forced confrontations and isolated disciplinary tactics, were meant to break down the individual's resistance to change, though it just left long-lasting emotional and physical scars. They would gain further notoriety in the 1990s and early 2000s when testimony from further students played key roles in legal cases, most notably the trial of Michael Shackle for murder. Witnesses from Elam testified about the brutal practices and abusive environment, and over time, the school's reputation for maltreatment led to numerous investigations by child welfare authorities, contributing to its eventual financial and enrollment decline, ultimately leading to the school to shut its doors on April 1st, 2011. The Kidwelly Cult was a secretive British sect operating in Kidwelly Wells, notorious for its decades of systematic abuse and exploitation of vulnerable minors. The group, known by its members simply as the Church, was led by Colin Batley, who, along with several accomplices, including key female figures, used the mix of occult symbolism and ritualistic practices to justify and facilitate the abuse of children. They would employ occult literature and materials as part of initiation ceremonies designed to break down the psychological defenses of young recruits, coercing them into enduring sexually abusive acts through a combination of brainwashing, death threats, and strict control over their lives. Victims recounted being forced to participate in ceremonies where the abuse was presented in a form of spiritual initiation, and the abuse was so pervasive and severe that it spanned decades. And ultimately, in 2011, a landmark trial resulted in the conviction and sentencing of Colin Batley, 3 female members, and another male accomplice on multiple charges, including rape and indecent assault of minors, underscoring the deeply destructive impact of this cult on their victims. The Alamo Christian Foundation was founded in 1969 by Tony Alamo and his wife, Susan, in Hollywood, California. Together, they established a sect that aggressively recruited young people, often luring them from the streets of Hollywood to isolated services with promises of salvation and transformation through strict adherence to a fundamentalist Pentecostal Christian doctrine. The group built a robust media presence by producing religious tracts, tapes, and even national television ministry, while also venturing into business projects, such as decorating denim jackets, which they used unpaid child labor to do. Over time, they became notorious, not only for its unorthodox beliefs, but for its abusive practices, and after relocating to Dyer, Arkansas, the group expanded rapidly, establishing schools, printing facilities, and various enterprises. Susan Alamo would die from breast cancer in 1982, and Tony Alamo's increasingly abusive and exploitative behavior, particularly towards minors, would lead to his conviction in 2009 on 10 counts of transporting children for sexual exploitation and child rape. And he would be sentenced to 175 years in prison and remain behind bars until his death in 2017. Los Narcos Santanicos was an infamous drug trafficking and occult gang that operated in Matamoros, Mexico, under the leadership of cult figure Adolfo de Jesus Constanzo and his right-hand woman, Sarah Aldrete. They were called the narco-Satanists by the media as they blended brutal criminal enterprises with sinister occult rituals. And Adolfo, who claimed mystical powers and even asserted a connection to ancient ritual magic, attracted a network of followers, including drug traffickers, hitmen, and corrupt officials, as his gang built alliances with major drug cartels, turning their occult activities into a potent tool for gaining protection and power in the violent underworld of northern Mexico. They would become notorious for their ritualistic killings, and most shockingly, exemplified by the murder of American student Mark Kilroy, whose brutal death, as he was tortured and dismembered as a part of a dark sacrificial rite, led to authorities eventually dismantling the cult after a violent confrontation in which Adolfo was killed during a shootout. Following his death, numerous cult members were arrested and given lengthy prison sentences, including his accomplice Sarah Aldrete, who received a sentence of 62 years, and it was assumed that they had up to 26 victims. Colonia Dignidad was established in the early 1960s in Chile by German immigrants under the leadership of Paul Schaefer, who was a fugitive preacher with a notorious past of child molestation accusations in West Germany. Schaefer crafted an isolated, self-sufficient community in the remote Mao region of Chile, presenting it as a model of German efficiency, discipline, and communal living. And the colony was fortified with barbed wire fences, watchtowers, and secret caches, creating a state within a state environment. The community was deeply influenced by Schaefer's strict religious and occult beliefs, which underscored its insular and authoritarian nature. Beneath this facade, Colonia Dignidad would become infamous for its systemic human rights abuses during General Augusto Pinochet's military dictatorship in the 1970s, as the colony served as a clandestine detention and torture center where political dissidents were imprisoned, brutally tortured, and in many cases, executed, in collaboration with some of the members of the colony's leadership. Alongside political repression, the community was also plagued by widespread reports of child abuse, forced labor, and psychological control, which Schaefer implicated in numerous atrocities. However, the colony maintained a tight grip on information, shielding its abuses behind an impenetrable wall of secrecy and state complicity. Eventually, Schaefer would flee to Argentina in 1996 to escape charges that were building up against him. However, Paul Schaefer would be found in March of 2005 and arrested, and he would spend the last 5 years of his life in prison in Chile. Universe people, also known as the cosmic people of light powers, emerged in the 1990s in the Czech Republic and Slovakia under leadership of Ivo A. Benda, claiming to receive telepathic and later even personal communications from advanced extraterrestrial civilizations since October 1997. The group would quickly distinguish itself as one of the region's most unique UFO religions. In its early years, they preached an apocalyptic vision marked by a looming cosmic catastrophe, even suggesting that humanity might be evacuated to another planet. However, by the early 2000s, the focus of their message shifted towards a defensive posture, warning against perceived threats, which they claim were sinister attempts to enslave mankind. Despite alarming doctrines, their public lectures and mass media appearances enabled them to cultivate a noble presence and even draw comparisons to other high-profile UFO cults. Benda suggested that benevolent extraterrestrial forces led by the Ashtar Galactic Command are monitoring Earth and will ultimately transport their followers into a higher dimension, while evil entities, often referred to as Saurians or lizard people, pose an ongoing threat to humanity. The group still has a prolific online presence and has attracted a niche following and also invited widespread mockery, underscoring the polarizing and controversial nature of its teachings. The Finders were a community and cult that emerged in the early 1970s in Washington, D.C., founded by former U.S. Air Force Master Sergeant Marion Petty. The group would attract official attention when, in 1987, 2 well-dressed members were arrested in Tallahassee, Florida, with 6 children. And investigations revealed that the children, ranging from toddlers to 11-year-olds, displayed signs of malnutrition, sexual abuse, and general neglect. Neighbors and eyewitnesses would go on to describe a disturbing environment at the group's rural farm where children were raised with minimal adult supervision, subject to harsh initiation, and sometimes kept in makeshift cages. Federal authorities eventually dropped the criminal charges against them after reuniting the children with their families, which ignited a long-standing controversy over the group's treatment of minors. The allegations of the Finders have evolved into broader conspiracy theories, with some claims suggesting the cult engaged in child trafficking and brainwashing, and even hinting at connections with the intelligence agencies. And despite the lack of evidence and eventual dismissal of all their charges in 1987, these theories have persisted, casting the Finders as a prime example of the early satanic panic in the United States. One Taste Incorporated, founded in San Francisco by Nicole Dedon and Robert Candle, markets itself as a revolutionary wellness company centered on the practice of orgasmic meditation, a slow, mindful technique that focuses on finger-to-genital contact to enhance intimacy and unlock the mind's full potential. They have attracted a wide following, and most notably celebrity endorsements, with fans such as Gwyneth Paltrow and Khloe Kardashian. However, the organization's high-priced seminars, sometimes costing tens of thousands of dollars, have raised red flags, and people argue that its aggressive sales tactics and pyramid-like structure leave many participants in debt, exploiting their vulnerabilities under the guise of spiritual and sexual empowerment. Despite its promise of self-transformation and enhanced intimacy, a 2018 expose by Bloomberg sparked an FBI investigation into allegations of forced labor, sex trafficking, and labor law violations, leading to Nicole being arrested in 2023 and indicted on a forced labor conspiracy charge. And she's actually going to trial this year in May. So, wow, yeah. Brother Stare is a charismatic yet highly controversial American evangelist who founded the Overcomer Ministry in 1978. Claiming prophetic authority, Stare established a tight-knit, self-sufficient community at his compound in Walterboro, South Carolina, where his followers were encouraged to abandon worldly possessions and live under strict traditional rules. His ministry was characterized by extensive radio broadcasting operation at its peak in the 1990s, and his teachings emphasized a return to conservative Christian lifestyle and warned of imminent divine judgment, which he asserted would radically transform the world. This blend of fiery prophecy, rigorous communal discipline, and technologically savvy media outreach made him a polarizing figure in American religious circles. However, his ministry was marred by numerous allegations and legal issues that ultimately overshadowed his public persona, as over the years he faced multiple arrests on charges, including sexual misconduct, most notably his later arrest in 2017 on several counts of criminal sexual conduct involving minors. And despite these controversies, he would maintain a loyal core of followers who could support his broadcasts until his eventual death in 2021. Jeffrey Lundgren, a former member of the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, established a radical offshoot group in Kirtland, Ohio, where his unorthodox interpretation of scripture, which he called chiastic interpretation, became the cornerstone of his cult's teachings. Jeffrey claimed that by analyzing sacred texts for mirrored patterns, he could find absolute truths and distinguish between divine and false revelations. And his teachings were centered on imminent divine intervention, proclaiming that the sacred Kirtland Temple was a distant site for a cataclysmic event and the second coming of Christ. As his influence grew, so did control over his followers, who were all indoctrinated with strict behavioral rules and isolated from external influences, setting the stage for the cult's eventual descent into violence. On April 17, 1989, the dark culmination of Jeffrey's twisted vision materialized when he orchestrated the brutal murder of the Avery family, a family of 5 who were fellow cult members. In a meticulously planned sequence, Jeffrey and his inner circle lured Dennis Avery and his family into a trap at his farmhouse, and once isolated, the cult members carried out the killing with cold precision, shooting them and using a chainsaw to mask the sound of the gunshots. The horrific act was described by Jeffrey as pruning the vineyard, and was not only intended as a punishment for perceived loyalty, but also as a perverse fulfillment of his apocalyptic prophecies. And following the discovery of the bodies, 9 months later, law enforcement swiftly dismantled the remnants of his operation, and he would be convicted and sentenced to death and eventually executed in 2006. The systems-based cult, often associated with the Suki Project, emerged on the internet in early 2017 and quickly garnered a niche following, intrigued by its cryptic promises of transcending our mundane reality. At its core, the cult propagated the idea that our world is just a simulation among many in the vast multiverse, and that upon death, people could ascend to a higher dimension. Members, known as migrants, were urged to register their souls on the cult's website to ensure their safe passage to this promised state after death. Yeah, it was like a little website that popped out of nowhere. Interesting. Universal Medicine is an Australian organization founded in 1999 by Sergey Benhayan, who is a self-styled seer who claimed to be the new messiah and an ascended master. The group marketed itself as an esoteric healing and wellness enterprise, offering treatments such as esoteric breast massage, which was promoted to cure or prevent breast cancer. Yep. His teachings combined elements of meditation, nutrition, psychological well-being, and spiritual discipline, and the organization would amass a significant following. However, allegations would rise, including financial exploitation through exorbitant fees for seminars and training, emotional and sexual manipulation of vulnerable clients, and the use of aggressive legal tactics to silence detractors. And despite public denials of wrongdoing and his portrayal of universal medicine as a legitimate teacher of ageless wisdom, mounting evidence and court findings have cemented its status as a socially harmful cult. Sodalitium Christianae Vitae, or SCV, I'm sure I pronounced that terribly, was a Catholic society of apostolic life founded in 1971 in Peru by Luis Fernando Figari. Its mission centered on social justice, cultural education, and defense of family, with strong emphasis on integral life of faith. And over the years, they would establish numerous initiatives, from youth congresses to charitable projects. However, despite its initial promise, they became notorious for a series of scandals and abuses that tarnished its reputation, as numerous allegations emerged over the years accusing its founder, Luis Fernando Figari, and other members of sexual abuse, physical and psychological mistreatment, and financial corruption, ranging from the exploitation and maltreatment of minors to the implementation of authoritarian practices that amounted to brainwashing. Prominent figures within the Peruvian church would publicly condemn the organization, and ultimately these controversies led Pope Francis himself to dissolve the society on January 20th, 2025. Black Hebrew Israelites are a diverse new religious movement that emerged in the late 19th century, asserting that African Americans, and in some cases other non-white peoples, are true descendants of the ancient Israelites. Early pioneers like Frank Cherry and William Saunders Crowdy claimed divine revelations that redefined racial identity through a biblical lens, leading to the establishment of congregations that blended elements of Judaism and Christianity with distinct Afrocentric interpretations of scripture. And over time, the movement would fragment into numerous sects with varying doctrines and practices, ranging from those who adhere closely to traditional Jewish customs to more radical groups that espouse black supremacist and anti-Semitic rhetoric. Man, I'm tired of talking about the Westboro Baptist Church, bro. They are a small, unaffiliated primitive Baptist congregation based in Topeka, Kansas, founded in 1955 by Fred Phelps, and over the decades they have been infamous for their incendiary public protests against various groups, most notably the LGBTQ community, as well as Jews, Muslims, and other Christians. Phelps and his followers, who largely comprise his extended family, espouse a hyper-Calvinist theology, claiming that disasters and societal calamities are manifestations of God's wrath against sin. And man, we talked about them like a fucking 100 times, man. You know how this shit goes. Amway Corporation is one of the world's largest multi-level marketing companies. It was founded in 1959 by Jay Van Andel and Richard DeVoe and operates through a vast network of independent business owners who market a wide range of health, beauty, and home care products directly to consumers. It's argued that its business model, which emphasizes relentless recruitment and the purchase of motivational materials and training seminars, create an environment where most distributors earn very little or even incur losses, while a small group at the top garners substantial profits, or what may also be known as a pyramid scheme. It has also been characterized as exhibiting cult-like qualities, as distributors often participate in highly orchestrated motivational events that emphasize quasi-religious devotion to the company's ethos of prosperity and self-improvement. This, combined with an insular culture that prioritizes group loyalty and intensive personal development seminars, has led to comparisons with cultic organizations, despite Amway's status as a legitimate business. Don't get caught up in pyramid schemes, man. The Lorber Society is a decentralized spiritual movement inspired by the 19th century Christian mystic Jacob Lorber, who claimed to receive divine revelations directly from Jesus Christ. His extensive writings, totaling over 10,000 pages, had given rise to small study groups and publishing houses, primarily in German-speaking Europe, where people viewed his work as a continuation or completion of biblical teachings. And despite its peaceful, esoteric nature, they became linked to a gruesome crime in Spain known as the Alexander family murders, as in 1970, Harold Alexander, a devout follower of the movement, convinced himself that his son, Frank, was a prophesied Messiah that was destined to save humanity. And under this delusion, the family would engage in incestuous practices, which would eventually escalate to violence, as on December 16th, 1970, in their home in Santa Cruz, Frank, who was 16 at the time, brutally murdered his mother and two sisters, while his father played religious hymns, believing that they were possessed by demons. The victims were then mutilated in a ritualistic fashion, with their remains displayed on the walls. Their trial in 1972 led to their institutionalization in a psychiatric hospital. However, they escaped in the early 1990s, and their whereabouts remain unknown to this day, as does that of the only other surviving family member, Sabine. Ooh, man. La Luz del Mundo is a non-Trinitarian Christian movement founded in Mexico in 1926 during a time of religious and political upheaval, and it presents itself as the restoration of the original primitive church established by Jesus Christ. The church's theology centers on the belief that its founder, Aaron Joaquin, later succeeded by his son Samuel and then his grandson Nason, were divinely called to reestablish the true Christianity, and its followers reject traditional Christian symbols like the cross, opting instead for a plain worship space devoid of images, and adhering to strict codes of dress and gender separation during services. They have grown into an international organization with congregations in over 50 countries, offering a blend of spiritual teachings, community services, and a robust missionary outreach. Despite its rapid growth and broad appeal, the church has been filled with controversy and allegations of abuse, as people have accused its leadership of cultivating a cult of personality and engaging in financial corruption and sexual abuse, with recent convictions of its current leader, Nason Joaquin Garcia, on charges related to the abuse of children, and their ongoing controversies continue to attract media scrutiny and legal challenges, casting a long shadow over the church's spiritual claims and its impact on followers' lives. The true Russian Orthodox Church was an independent doomsday cult founded by Pyotr Kuznetsov that splintered from the mainstream Russian Orthodox Church, which its members deemed insufficiently orthodox. The group imposed a strict lifestyle on its followers, as they were forbidden from consuming processed foods, watching television, or handling money. And they also rejected modern identification methods, such as barcodes, social security numbers, and passports, which they believed were imbued with satanic symbols. In November 2007, they would gain national attention when between 29 and 35 of the members barricaded themselves in a cave in the Penza region, following Piotr's prediction that the end of the world would occur in May of 2008. Isolated in the harsh Russian winter, they remained in the cave for nearly 6 months, with authorities, religious leaders, and media surrounding the site as they awaited what they thought was a mass suicide or eventual surrender. Over time, as conditions worsened, exacerbated by toxic fumes from decaying bodies of people that died in the cave, small groups began emerging, and by May 2008, the last 9 members would come out of the cave. And while some would go on to continue following some radical religions, Pyotr himself would be institutionalized. The Solovanians were an informal, controversial therapeutic community that emerged from the unorthodox practices of psychotherapist Saul B. Newton in New York City. Newton and his wife founded the Sullivan Institute for Research in Psychoanalysis in 1957, and over time, a loosely structured community formed around his teachings, as at its peak in the 70s, several hundred members, comprising both patients and therapists, lived together in the Upper West Side, embracing a non-monogamous lifestyle and often being urged to sever ties with their biological families. This lifestyle, combined with the Institute's experimental and often ethically questionable therapeutic methods, led to widespread allegations of abuse and exploitation. After Newton's death in 1991, numerous former female patients and colleagues publicly accused him of misconduct, and many children born into the group later recounted experiences of neglect and abuse attributed to Newton's controversial theories. And it was revealed that the Solovanians were basically a psychotherapy cult. And over time, membership would dwindle due to negative media culture, high-profile child custody battles, and investigations into the group's professional practices, leading to the eventual dissolution of the group's movement. There are persistent online rumors and conspiracy theories alleging that actor and musician Jared Leto leads a secretive island cult. And according to these unfounded claims, Leto and a select group of devoted followers reportedly retreat to this remote tropical island where they engage in esoteric rituals that blend New Age spirituality, occult practices, and avant-garde artistic expression. It's yeah, I mean, you can see it however you want to. They're probably just, getting high. But of course, people see this as sketchy, and anyone who would pay this much to do this is fucking insane, especially with Jared Leto. Like, I don't know. But yeah, it's an interesting one. The Final Fantasy House was a real-world, cult-like community that emerged in the early 2000s from within the Final Fantasy VII fan scene. Centered in State College, Pennsylvania, the group was led by Jennifer Cornet, and it attracted vulnerable individuals and young people struggling with personal issues such as identity conflicts, family problems, or substance abuse by intertwining the popular video games lore with its daily activities. Members within this house adopted aliases and character names drawn from Final Fantasy VII, and the community structure was loosely organized around the shared participation in elaborate rituals and practices inspired by the game, with members often being isolated from the outside world and subject to intense psychological control. In this house, residents reported harsh living conditions marked by emotional, physical, and psychological abuse, and testimonies collected on online platforms described an environment where basic needs were manipulated as tools of control. For instance, disputes over items, and the group or group leader employed coercive tactics that included financial exploitations and severe monitoring of communications, and at some instances like torture. I think like someone was like forced to sit in like a bathtub of ice cubes or some shit like that. It was crazy. And this left some members feeling trapped and vulnerable. And ultimately, the culminative abuse and constant control led individuals to leave this environment and later share their experiences with us online to warn others about the dangers of cult-like groups that co-opt popular culture in order to exploit disaffected fans. Buddha Fueled is a New Age cult that began in the 1980s in Hollywood and later established a presence in Hawaii, often recruiting new members through yoga studios. And this group was led by Jamie Gomez, known by various aliases such as Michel, Andreas, the teacher, and Reiji, who presents himself as a spiritual leader with alleged divine power. Drawing on Eastern spirituality and New Age ideas, Buddhafield incorporates concepts like Shakti to explain the transfer of his supposed spiritual energy to his followers, and members are required to adopt new names and adhere to strict lifestyle guidelines, including celibacy and abstinence from drugs and alcohol. Former members have made numerous allegations against Buddhafield, accusing Jamie Gomez of employing manipulative and controlling tactics to maintain authority over his followers, and ex-members claim that he isolated them from outside information and used techniques such as hypnotherapy during weekly sessions to extract confessions and use them against people and reinforce his control. And several former adherents have accused him of sexually abusing male followers, and there are reports that he instigated an atmosphere of fear, using events like the Waco siege to heighten paranoia within the group. And despite these allegations, Gomez has consistently denied any wrongdoing, asserting that his teachings promote universal love and spiritual awakening. And he still maintains a small following today. Pythagoreanism, founded in 6th century BC by Pythagoras, began as a philosophical school and secretive religious community, as its followers followed a strict way of life that combined religious mathematical study with esoteric spiritual practices. New initiates underwent a lengthy period of silent instruction, akusmata, which was sacred oral teachings, before gaining access to the inner circle's more advanced doctrines, and the group adhered to strict dietary restrictions, such as vegetarianism and the avoidance of beans, and they regulated social behavior and participated in communal living that emphasized purity, discipline, and the pursuit of wisdom. These practices, along with the secrecy of the initiation rites and hierarchical structure, led modern scholars to compare Pythagorean communities to cults, even though their intellectual legacy has significantly influenced Western thought. Word of Faith Fellowship is a Protestant, non-denominational church founded in 1979 in Spindale, North Carolina by Jane Whaley and her husband, Sam Whaley, who transformed a former steakhouse into a chapel. Under Jane Whaley's charismatic leadership, the church grew rapidly from modest local congregation to a global network, with affiliated branches in established countries such as Brazil, Ghana, Scotland, and Sweden. The church was characterized by a strict, detailed set of behavioral rules, allegedly running to over 100 entries that regulate nearly every aspect of a member's life, including prohibitions on celebrating mainstream holidays, consuming certain media, and making personal life decisions without prior approval. Over the years, they would of course face numerous allegations from former members in investigative reports accusing it of cult-like behavior and abuse, and it's claimed that the church employs harsh disciplinary methods, including physical beatings during extended blasting sessions aimed at expelling supposed demons. For example, in 2017, a Matthew Fenner testified that after he and his family joined the church, he witnessed members being shouted out for hours to remove demons, and he himself was allegedly beaten for 2 hours to, quote, break him free of homosexual demons. Yeah. Of which 5 church members would be indicted for this and charged with kidnapping and assault. Former members have also detailed experiences with isolation, enforced labor, and other severe punishment for minor infractions. Despite these allegations, current church officials maintain that their practices are rooted in strong biblical teachings, deep commitment to community, and spiritual transformation. Zen Master Rama, who was born Frederick Philip Lenz III, emerged as a charismatic spiritual leader who sought to pioneer what he called American Buddhism, drawing on an eclectic mix of Tibetan Buddhism, Zen, Vedanta, mysticism, and New Age thought. He reinvented Eastern spiritual traditions for a modern American audience. And he built a sizable following through his engaging lectures, meditation seminars, and the promotion of what he termed Tantric Zen. His teachings emphasized self-discovery with the transcendent power of meditation and the potential for personal ecstasy and enlightenment, with numerous followers attesting to experiences of apparent supernatural phenomena such as levitation and energy projection during his sessions. Despite the appeal of his teachings, his leadership was marked by persistent allegations of cult-like behavior and exploitation, as former disciples accused him of exercising undue level of control over his followers, alleging financial, psychological, and sexual exploitation, and disaffected family members would organize campaigns to expose what they saw as manipulative practices, asserting that his tight control over members' personal and professional lives contributed to a dangerous, insular community. However, before this could all be brought to trial, Zen Master Rama's life would end in apparent suicide in 1998, and his contested $23 million estate would lead to the establishment of a foundation intended to further support American Buddhist organizations. The Dami Mission was a South Korean Christian cult founded by Lee Jong-rim that captured global attention for its catastrophic apocalyptic prophecy. At its peak, the movement had over 300 churches and 20,000 followers in South Korea, with branches extending to Los Angeles and New York, and Lee declared that on October 28th, 1992, 144,000 believers will be raptured into heaven, leaving the rest of humanity to suffer 7 years of war, famine, and other calamities before the second coming of Christ. This doomsday spurred a series of tragic actions among devotees, including suicides, fatal fasting rituals, and even a woman aborting her pregnancy in anticipation for the apocalypse. And when this prophesied event failed to occur, authorities intervened amid public outcry, ultimately arresting Lee on fraud charges for embezzling millions of dollars from his followers by investing their donations into bonds that he was going to collect on after his predicted date, and the movement would disband shortly after. Cyrus, founded by French UFO contactee Jean-Regard Migueres in 1987, was promoted as a spiritual movement aimed at preparing humanity for an eventual alien arrival. Jean insisted that Cyrus was not a religion, however, its organizations and teachings bore strong similarities to cult-like structures. Its core message combined Jean's claims of extraterrestrial contact with his interest in spiritual enlightenment, emphasizing the need for a significant shift in human consciousness, and his followers were encouraged to focus on inner realization, with his third and final book, La Révélation, in 1996, making a departure from his earlier focus on scientific evidence and instead adopting a more religious tone. Despite his attempt to distance Cyrus from traditional religious groups or cult classifications, the organization was labeled a cult, partly due to its unorthodox beliefs and his role as a central figure with significant control over followers' lives. And in 1992, Jean would be tragically murdered by his father-in-law, who was also a member of the anti-cult group ADFI. Apparently, he did this because he saw him as a dangerous cult leader, and following Jean's death, his teachings continued to draw attention, particularly from Rael, the leader of Raelism. Yeah, you remember. The Khorasan Unity was a communal utopia founded in the 1870s by Cyrus Teed, a supposed distant relative of Joseph Smith. Teed proclaimed himself the new Messiah and introduced an eclectic set of beliefs that combined utopian communalism, celibacy, and advanced scientific theories. And according to doctrine, there was a concept of a concave, hollow earth where humanity resided on the inner surface. The group's social structure was equally distinctive, with restrictions on sexual activity, culminating in a core of celibate, fully communal followers. And his teachings also embraced gender equality, positing a view of divinity as a fusion of male and female qualities, which resonated with those seeking liberation from traditional marital roles during the time. Eventually seeking a permanent home for his vision, Teed relocated his followers to Estero, Florida, where they established a thriving community that reached its peak in the early 1900s with over 200 residents. However, following his death in 1908 and the challenges of sustaining the community, membership began to decline, leading to the eventual dissolution of the movement. Chen Tao, also known as God's Salvation Church, was a UFO-based religious movement that originated in Taiwan under the leadership of Han Ming Chen, a former professor who shifted from atheism to spiritual cultivation after his involvement with a long-established religious group. He would infuse his new movement with a blend of UFO lore, pseudo-scientific cosmology, and Christian millennial prophecies. And Chen famously predicted that on March 31st, 1998, God would appear on Channel 18 across North America. However, when this event failed to materialize, disillusionment would settle in, leading Chen to claim a misunderstanding of God's plan and offering himself to be stoned or crucified. And this all led to the group's decline, with the remaining followers relocating to Lockport, New York, where they revised their apocalyptic predictions to involve a catastrophic war between China and Taiwan. Wait a minute. Jehovah Wenyoni was a self-proclaimed deity in Western Kenya who led a cult-like ministry known as the Lost Israelites of Kenya. He claimed to be the Almighty God, with Jesus Christ as his son, as he elevated his status by declaring the nearby Mount Elgon as Mount Zion, symbolically positioning it as a sacred site. Wenyoni promised miraculous cures, notably asserting that he could cure AIDS, and demanded an exorbitant ransom of 3 billion Kenyan shillings, warning of divine and retribution on Kenya if his financial demands were not met. And his personal life was as extravagant as his claims, which reportedly involved 70 wives and 95 children. And he maintained a following of around 1,000 devotees who revered him as a living god. However, he would eventually die on July 18th, 2015, at the age of 91. The Zizians are really recent, like super recent, and they are a fringe cult-like group in the United States that were reportedly led by Jack or Ziz Lasoda, who is a transgender person with a computer science background whose online writings blend rationalist philosophy and with anarchism, extreme veganism, and esoteric musings on consciousness. The group attracted members largely from the tech and rationalist communities, advocating for a rejection of societal norms and legal constraints. However, over time, they have been implicated in a series of violent incidents and murders spanning multiple states, from a double homicide in Pennsylvania and a knife attack in California to a fatal shootout with a U.S. Border Patrol agent in Vermont. Law enforcement investigations have linked several key members to these violent crimes, painting a picture of a group whose cult-like dynamics and the influence of Ziz have driven them to commit these extreme acts in the name of their warped moral code. Blood over intent is a controversial and disturbing practice associated with a fringe group of individuals who believe in the power of using one's own blood as a symbolic offering in order to manifest personal desires or invoke a supernatural energy. And it's garnered a lot of attention on social media, where it's promoted as a method for gaining power or control over one's life. Adnan Akhtar emerged as one of Turkey's most notorious cult leaders and Muslim televangelists. Beginning his public career in the 1980s, he crafted a unique Quran-centric interpretation of Islam that deliberately rejected established Sunni and Shia traditions in favor of his own vision. He built an expansive media empire, publishing hundreds of books and producing high-quality videos that argued against Darwinism, while simultaneously engaging in an aggressive legal campaign against his detractors. His cult further distinguished itself through its unconventional presentation and internal practices, as his television channel featured frequent broadcasts of his lectures, interspersed with appearances by female members who he affectionately termed his kittens, creating a provocative image that clashed with traditional Islamic decorum. This would all contribute to numerous legal controversies and allegations of criminal behavior, including abuse of minors, political and military espionage, and the formation of a criminal enterprise. And this would all culminate in a historic conviction and staggering prison sentence, that being 8,658 years in prison. The Ku Klux Klan, we've talked about them way too much by now, and we know who they are. They're primarily recognized for their extremist ideology and hate crimes, and they exhibit many characteristics of a cult. Certain branches are structured around secret rituals, symbolic regalia, and a hierarchical organization that fosters intense loyalty and group cohesion among its members, with a rigid dogma that reinforces a us versus them mentality, and an indoctrinated, distorted worldview centered on racial purity and conspiracy theories. You know how it goes. The Bohemian Grove is an exclusive, highly secretive retreat in Monte Rio, California, where the wealthy and powerful, primarily elite businessmen, politicians, and media moguls, gather annually for 2 weeks under the private Bohemian Club. It was founded in the late 19th century, and the club hosts extravagant rituals, theatrical performances, and discussions, with the most infamous ceremony being called the Cremation of Care, which is a mock sacrificial ritual where a human effigy is burned before a massive owl statue, symbolizing the casting away of worldly concerns. And while it's officially described as a social club where influential figures can relax and bond away from public scrutiny, conspiracy theories have, of course, long speculated that the Bohemian Grove serves as a hub for occult activities, secret policymaking, and elite power consolidation. And though journalists and whistleblowers like Alex Jones have attempted to expose its inner workings, the club continues to maintain strict secrecy, fueling ongoing speculation about its true purpose. Cargo cults are spiritual and political movements that emerged in Melanesia following Western colonization in the late 19th century. Prophetic figures who predict an imminent cataclysm or coming of a utopian era during which deceased ancestors will return bearing cargo, that being an abundance of Western goods and wealth. These movements often arose as indigenous peoples experienced the disruptive effects of colonialism and abrupt exposure to advanced technology and material wealth, which they interpreted through the lens of their traditional beliefs and social structures. And early cargo cults integrated aspects of indigenous ritual, such as ecstatic dancing and imitative behaviors, such as marching or flag raising. And although the term cargo cult has fallen out of favor among anthropologists who criticize it as a pejorative and oversimplified label, the phenomenon remains a powerful metaphor for the complex interplay between indigenous cultures and colonial disruption in the pursuit of social and material renewal. The Illuminati were originally established in 1776 by Adam Weishaupt in Bavaria as an Enlightenment-era secret society aimed at promoting rational thought, opposing religious and state abuses, and advancing educational and social reform. Adam envisioned an organization that would foster free thinking and moral integrity by challenging the oppressive influence of established institutions like the Catholic Church and aristocracy, and this culminated in a series of government crackdowns in the late 18th century, which effectively disbanded the original Bavarian Illuminati and led to their vilification by conservative and religious critics. However, over the centuries, the legacy of the Illuminati has evolved far beyond its historical origins, becoming a central figure in numerous modern conspiracy theories. And in popular culture, they are frequently depicted as a cult-like cabal, an underground network that manipulates global events to establish a new world order. And yeah, that's all we're going to talk about today. Watch out for these cults, man, because there are people out there that are sketchy as shit. They're finessers, and you got to be careful. You know what I mean? Yeah, I don't know. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something, maybe. I hope it was entertaining. I hope you're doing well, and I will catch you in the next one. I love you, bro.